ninth decimal point. And the little error that does exist, just a little fragmentary error, is probably due to the fact of the minor earthquake that shook off that corner. The building was built by somebody who knew it.
Still alive. They're trying to capture me again. I'm meeting Garfield again. Physically this time. Because they're annoyed.
We have to admit under those conditions that the Egyptians were pretty smart people. Because if they built the pyramids, they had a knowledge not only of architecture, but a knowledge of mathematics, and a knowledge of astronomy, and a knowledge of architecture that was prodigious.
You don't have right to exist.
About all of these subjects than we knew 100 years ago.
They like to hurt people.
Something in this story
is
another evidence that somewhere in the past there was a very great.
We do too. You people.
And if it was
Collie's dancing on demons.
That the period was oriented to the Sad Age, then the entire history of Egyptian philosophy and mathematics is set forth in that building. The Egyptians themselves at a very early time said that the Great Pyramid of Giza,
Big George had a garland of skulls around his neck for a fucking reason. This reason. You guys. My cat with a garland of skulls around his neck. They stole his collar. His too. Garfield's.
Now Hermes, as the Hermetic tradition tells us, was the god of wisdom. A being known to the Greeks as Hermes, known to the Romans as Mercury, known to the Egyptians as Thoth, the god of writing. And the last poem, by the way, of Longfellow, was an ode to Hermes, in which he said, Trismegistus, 3 times greater, how thy name sublime has descended to this latest progeny of time. Hermes Trismegistus, the embodiment of all knowledge that is knowable of nature. Hermes was the symbol of cosmic mind, of absolute knowledge. He was described as having written all the books of the world.
No, let's get pissed off, guys. And I'll still win. Always do.
He was the keeper of the great secrets of life.
Every time, every different scenario that we ran through, I always win in the end.
And this work of the Great Pyramid. Certain Hermetic books, probably written about the 1st century, credited with a greater antiquity, include a work written by Hermes, presumably, to his son Patience. And he says in this book to his
but some of this is a military base at the end.
The day shall come.
My kind.
There'll be no more
but you guys don't win.
That nothing will remain of this great empire except broken columns half covered to the sand. And that was written over 2,000 years ago from existing manuscripts. So the entire problem of Egypt,
that's theocracy.
To the pyramids,
that's what they're trying to avoid. What, like church and state a long time ago?
Let's see now what we
Bullshit. We have more evidence now than you could ever imagine. For all of it. Now we do. Thanks to Taran. Big time.
For some reason, we're not very sure. The pyramid is on the reverse of the seal, the Great Seal of the United States. No one knows exactly why it was put there. No one knows who put it there.
Some of us literally thought we could do better, but we're evil. You guys really crying about this shit? You that scared to die or get caught? You are now because you've lied so much since. See what I mean? So they have to kill me to death because they're little kids. Can't accept their fate. And this is fun. Now this is fun. Trust me. Our fucked up cartography. Fucked up cartography, that's fun. What do you guys have? If you can't even find me. At 19323 Brookside Avenue, Weed, California, 96094. That's where I am. Way to try to use my magic against me, retards. I'll always win quickly, too, just in case. At this point.
Class is back in session. I sense that beast.
The Book of Earths. Written by Edna Kenton. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz.
533, guys.
1. Man's Quest in Space.
See what I mean? How they work?
This Book of Earths began years ago with a single little figure
They're disgusting,
of Earth
huh?
taken from what old book I do not know. For a long time it lay by itself. Then another came upon by chance was laid beside it, and still others as I happened on them, always by chance. Old odd maps joined the casual collection. Maps of the earth, the moon, the heavens. It was never a collection in the usual sense of the word, because it was so casual. But such as it was the origin of this book. For it occurred to me not long ago that it would be fun to put them all together, and many others with them, chosen to fill in the gaps of the original. Luckily, for the fun of it, the search about to begin would not be limited to what we know about the Earth, else it would have ended before it began. For we live in a universe of which we know little, and on a planet of which we know perhaps less. It would include not only what we know, or think today we know, but also anything that has been believed or felt, or no more than guessed to be the picture of the Earth and its place in the universe. It would include not only science,
Where's my
modern
tobacco?
and ancient, but tradition.
That just
The
cured.
older, the better. Diagrams or pictures based on little more than folklore.
We get some more rest, we'll get 3 hours.
Cosmogonies of religions great and small. Cosmogonies of philosophers, of poets, and of savages. It would gather together pictured theories, guesses, hypotheses, or merely flights of pure imagination, whether true or false today. Since history teaches us nothing if it does not teach us that 1 century's false doctrine is.
Have they been told not to? Yeah. Are they going to try anyways? Yeah. Watch them closely now.
Of any age or race are quite as
They can't be trusted at all. None of the operatives around me at all.
This collection,
Especially anyone related to them,
would not be scientific, not selected to prove one thing or to disprove another, not prejudged by any standard, but that of a record told in pictures and diagrams of what man has guessed this earth to be ever since he first began to wonder what the figure of the body was in which he lived. It would be free play through sources, once those sources were discovered. Play unhampered by any necessity for judgment or criticism, since what was sought was the record only. And so the search began, and the story of the search is personally as interesting as what it uncovered. It would be endless. That was clear from the beginning.
Antichrist.
And so it must be made deliberately brief. It could not include everything, even if everything came promptly to the surface.
He's like, I don't want to be like one of you.
But there were highlights in the record.
You're Antichrist because y'all think you're
began
God.
to show
You're not.
dignity from the first. The rest was a matter of blazing an untapped trail that would lead to the goal, the record. But that must allow for twists and turns, bypaths, now and then blind alleys in which often, as it proved, lurked the tip that had been lacking when one turned into them. More and more as the search went on, and one figure of Earth was added to another, it seemed worthwhile to bring a large number of them together. In such a collection of men, in which we live and its relations to the heavenly bodies by which it is surrounded, there would be surprising similitudes, identifications, recognitions, even a queer unity. There would be, too, in such a collection, enormous differences, opportunity for endless comparison, and endless wondering over the figures imagined by those supremely courageous men, the questioners of space. They are the men, anywhere, at any time, who have looked up at the unanswering heavens and asked, what and whence and why are those lights in the sky? Who have looked down at the unanswering earth and asked, what is this land that forever gives everything, even to me my life, and forever takes everything, even from me my life? What are these waters around it that sustain its life and mine? This fire within it that pours through its mountaintops and heats its boiling springs, whose spark lies still within the rock and wood from which my father's fathers first struck out their own first fire. What is this air I breathe that is around the earth and within it, in its secret caves? What is earth, and what am I? They are the men who have questioned, not idly, but unceasingly, knowing all the while that to the tiny questioner below there is no great answer above, that any answer to the question
my throat
of the speck in space, that is man,
are both wired, and so is my
turn of just questions.
belly button.
Nothing less. There is no equipment for this lonely quest. There is only man,
Diagram tip.
the questioner, and the universe, the great
Basically every
questioner.
chakra
The answer lies within man himself.
in weird places. Watch.
If ever we once realize this, we can never call them anything but supreme adventurers. Those men
Place my totem,
curious
basically.
enough to wonder enough, to question enough, to guess at last boldly enough to say, perhaps it is like this, and set down the image, even though it is no more than a small triangular peak of land rising from a watery waste, with the arch of the heavens above it, and between it and heaven, the sun and moon and stars. For guesswork is the beginning and the end of knowledge, man's own answers to his own questions. They may be right or wrong, but they are his. Today, we give scientific guesses a statelier title. We call them hypotheses. They are nothing more than guesses shot into still unanswering space. The hypothesis, for instance, that the Earth is an island, plain, mountain, or whatever, was first advanced when the first man of the first race drew the first figure of Earth. The guess, only that the figure of Earth is an oblate spheroid, is of our own era. Our hypotheses are continually changing. One supplants another, and is in its turn discarded for a new or an old one. And this has been the history of knowledge ever since the day.
Getting really
By
annoying.
sheer pressure of questioning, focused in a point that exploded into a
They get mad at cough up all up.
It is the process of
And these guys excuse to kill me.
that has carried
But they force me
man
to.
out.
The other guys do.
The heavens and the earth.
So these people behind me have an excuse to kill me, huh, asshole?
His answers are right or wrong. Man could
His
not
daddy told them
equip
not to.
himself for this quest in space, but he had been equipped after a fashion. He had a few resources, a few means. First of all,
And they're all exhausted personally,
science told him
but I'm not.
that he had within his body vestiges of all the life strata of the world. He had a vague knowledge that he is an integral part of the universe. And because he is a part of the universe, he had a vague knowledge of truth, or of segments of truth. He had numbers, he had signs, he had characters, he had symbols, all of these drawn in the heavens before he drew them on earth. He had words. He had the capacity to be curious, the capacity to wonder, the capacity to draw analogies between unseemingly unrelated things. From this scant handful of means, his faculty for guesswork developed. This is his whole story of all his perceptions of the universe and of his planet, for he has continuously dared the great adventure and has returned sometimes with pure gold. Two figures. The belief that the universe is composed of 5 great elements is untraceably old. Even the savage knows very well 4 of these elements: water, air, fire, and earth, and has a vague sense of the 5th, ether, or space. From varying combinations of these 5 elemental substances, the ancients believed all of the phenomena of nature were formed. Earth itself was composed, in the last analysis, of these 5. Man also, they believed, was a unique compound of these elements, and was, at death, resolved back into them. Each of these great creatures, as they were called, was symbolized by a certain shape, when the total figure of the 5 different forms, superimposed on one another in a regular order, is the stupa of China and India, the sotoba of Gorin of Japan, the 5-circle, or 5-zone, or 5-blossom funeral stone to be found everywhere in the Orient. The cube represents the earth, or stable foundation on which all builds. The sphere represents water, the pyramid or triangular tongue, or the elements in motion. The crescent or inverted vault of the sky, air or wind, the acuminated sphere or body pyriform, ether tapering into space. Of course, the old philosophers assigned particular places or grades to these 5 elements. Plato gave the first place to fire, the second to ether, then followed air, water, and lastly earth. But Aristotle placed ether first, as that which is impassible, it being a kind of 5th body, and after it he placed those elements that are passible, in the order of fire, air, water, and earth. Sit down with pencil and paper, or, as the first mathematicians did, sit down on the seashore and draw with a shell on the sands the simple or complex geometrical figures, whatever you will. It will be a rather unremarkable accident if you happen to put down a single figure that is not at some time represented either the figure of Earth directly or a direct relation of the Earth to the universe. Take the 5 regular solids, for instance: the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the icosahedron, the cube, and the dodecahedron. The Earth has been a tetrahedron, and it has been many, many times a cube. It has been conceived of as an 8-sided figure. One of the Siberian tribes believes today that the octahedron is the true figure of Earth. It was by way of the 5 regular solids, the 5 mathematical bodies that Kepler, as we shall see later on, sought to solve the mystery of distances in the heavens. Seeking for some fixed relation of distances between the 6 planets and the Sun, he found, or believed he found, that the 5 regular solids fitted between the 6 spheres in a very curious order, and he elaborated on the nature of these solids and their relation to our solar system all his life. The nature of the tetrahedron was of fire. The nature of the octahedron was of flying birds. The nature of the icosahedron was of water. The nature of the cube was of Earth, even though it fitted into place between Saturn and Jupiter, and the nature of the dodecahedron was that of the celestial vault, or ether. Earth has been given also at one time or another, and in one way or another, all of the pyramidal forms. It has been figured as a 3-sided and a 4-sided pyramid, and likewise as a cone. It has been a cylinder filled with compressed air and balanced in the center of the universe. It has been, at one time, a ridge form, a 3-cornered form, says Ricordes, The Castle of Knowledge, 1556. Like the ridge of a house where one side layeth flat, and the other 2 lean aslope, and this form they judged better for 2 causes. First, they thought it was more steady than cube form, because it hath a broader foot, and a lesser top. And secondly, for that they thought it a more apt form to walk on, and more agreeable to the nature of the earth, where sometimes there riseth high hill, and sometimes again men may see great vales descending. Again, they think this ridge form meetest for the standing of the sea, and for the running of rivers. For in the first form, a cube, if the sea should rest on the outermost plain, then would it overrun all that plain, and so flow over all the earth, whereas in this second form it might rest about the foot of the earth, and yet the slope rising will not permit it to run over all the earth. And so for rivers, if there is no slopeness, as in a cube there is none, then cannot the rivers run well. Already in these dozen geometrical figures we have collected 2 groups, one of which, the 5 regular solids, has been noted. The other one is that group from which all the known crystalline mineral forms, except radium and helium, can be constructed. The 8 basic elemental geometrical magnitudes, with 8 definite bounding surfaces that compose a perfect series. The first is the sphere with its one and only surface. The second is the cone with its 2 surfaces. The third is the cylinder with its 3 surfaces. The fourth is the tetrahedron with its 4 surfaces. The fifth is the 3-sided tablet with its 5 surfaces. The sixth is the cube with its 6 surfaces. The seventh is the 5-sided tablet with its 7 surfaces. The eighth is the octahedron with its 8 surfaces. And then again, the Earth has been represented by a figure quite outside the angular figures. The sphere, for instance, as a figure of Earth, appears to be as old as any of the others, and, like the others, has undergone the test of recurrence. But an even more curious form has been ascribed to this still mysterious planet of ours, a spiral. The beginning, or the end, that is, of a spiral form, like the vine, or like a watch spring which, stretched or sprung, may reach from earth to heaven, along which all that lives in the universe may descend and ascend, a sort of Jacob's ladder without rungs. Before man had the watch spring, his own creation, he had before him the vine, nature's handiwork, and he used it to symbolize that for which he was always seeking, the connecting link, the path of communication between earth and heaven. Of the spiral forms given in figure 14, the 2 small ones in the center are modern drawings of radium and helium atoms, but their duplicates are to be found in the oldest, crudest pictographs of the cosmos. Man's attempt to represent by a line either Earth's creative power and strength and energy, or the mysterious potent force of nature itself. The lower spiral is the ordinary right-handed or dextral curve found everywhere in nature. The upper left-handed or sinistral spiral, with its flying birds in opposition, is a curious little drawing taken from Physiologia Picturiana Experimentalis, 1680, perhaps suggested by Leonardo da Vinci's notebook on the flight of birds, written nearly 2 centuries earlier while he was making his marvelous studies of spiral formations. For the great struggle of one element against another, suggested in this sinistral spiral, was itself to Leonardo the very secret of the mysterious force which shapes the structure of waves, of reeds, of animals, of man, of shells and horns and flowers and climbing vines. The force itself he could not define, but its movement he could trace, and its path was not a line or a closed circle, but a spiral twist, which might take the right-handed or the rarer left-handed way. There came to him what might be called a revelation of spirality, and he found the coil of a worm, the curve of the humblest shell, the wreathing smoke of a candle, the tiny whirl of street dust, the budding of a fern or a cyclamen, of an onion or a rose, just as significant as the spiral-like flight of birds or the spiral formations of water. For thousands of years before him, ancient temples and tombs and sacred rocks had been engraved with significant studies in spiral forms, many of those of the Eastern world based beyond all doubt on the struggle of the lotus with the elements and on the analogy of the lotus to the earth, even to the cosmos itself. The ancient stupa was not only a symbol of the 5 great elements, but it was also for the Orient an almost literal drawing of the lotus plant, rooted in earth, climbing through water by grace of its inner fire to air, lifting there its acuminated spherical bud, and blossoming with a spiral twist into space. To the ancient mind, the secret path of nature's immortal force was always most significantly symbolized by a spiral line, and it was suggested in 1,000 ways. A sphere or a hemisphere may be a solid body, or it may be merely a shell, and Earth has been again many times imagined as a half shell, swimming like an upturned basket or boat on the surface of limitless waters, not sinking because its concavity was filled with air which, pressing on the water, balanced the hollow shell. Or again, Earth has been, and is still today, plain flat. They fantasized, wrote old Recorde, that it would rest most steadily, and so it was very easy to walk on. We are, he adds, more beholden to those men for devising our easy walking than we are bound to them for their wise doctrine. The 4th sect, fearing least by this opinion they should loose the sea and all other waters, imagined the form of the earth more apt to hold water, and devise it hollow, like a bowl. It was always a problem for the early designers of the figure of Earth to account for the support of the heavens, and this idea of the habitable Earth, hollow like a bowl, was much more clearly and generally expressed by figuring the Earth as a flat disk or plane surrounded by a continuous mountain wall on which the heavens rested. Only 1,400 years ago, with the theory of the spherical Earth the prevailing scientific one, but with all its vexing by-problems unsolved, not only that of an unsupported sky, but of men forced to walk like flies on the opposite ceiling of the earth, one cosmogonist, Cosmos Indicopleustis, disposed of the whole matter by simply enclosing the entire visible universe in a hollow rectangular box and shutting down the lid. Man lived inside his box like a squirrel in a cage. The Cosmasian idea was a simpler scheme of world-making than the model offered in Figure 19. But it happened that this simple geometric figure is very similar to the Babylonian concept of the universe. Earth as a series of stages or steps, pyramidal in structure, enclosed within a series of concentric spheres. For the idea that heaven is round and that Earth is square is very old, as old perhaps as the square and the circle, the foundation of measure. Heaven is round like an opened umbrella, say the Chinese. Earth is square like a chessboard, or Earth is square like a box. Heaven is round like the awning of a carriage. Yet on what, if the earth is square, may the dome of heaven rest? Not only that it may have firm support, but also that it may be tightly joined to the earth, For the ancients greatly feared that heaven, illy supported, might collapse and destroy its foundation. They feared also that if heaven and earth were not hermetically cemented or glued together, untold horrors might creep into this universe from some fabulous outside. For instance, the circular edge of the heavenly dome might find support firm enough by resting on the four quarters of the square earth, in spite of the intervening arcs of water it must span. But there would be the open quarters, and unknown and unimaginable monsters might succeed in swimming through the depths of water under heaven's unguarded edge, and so insinuate themselves into the earth waters, with the very probable result of the destruction of the world. Therefore, said some, heaven's edge might very well begin as a square joined tightly to the earth square, and then melt insensibly into the rounded firmament. But, said others, heaven is immeasurably high, earth immeasurably deep. Each covers the other, and both fit tightly together. Whether square or round, both must be one or the other. A six-faced tetrahedron, a solid giving the maximum of surface for the minimum of volume, represents, according to one theory, the figure of Earth. This particular theory, a theory, by the way, of the latter 19th century, would seem to argue for the existence of an economical universe, with the Earth modeled on a plan designed to produce the greatest possible surface from the least possible substance. And Earth is also the mundane egg, or oval form. There is another thing in antiquity, wrote Thomas Burnet in his The Theory of the Earth, 1697, relating to the form and construction of the earth, which is very remarkable, and hath obtained throughout all learned nations and ages, and that is the comparison or resemblance of the earth to an egg. This notion of the mundane egg, or that the world was oviform, hath been the sense and language of all antiquity, Latins, Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and others. Burnet did not overstate his case, for this was his theory also. The concept of the earth as the mundane egg, or of the universe as the cosmic egg, is one of the ancient of ancient figures of earth. It appears everywhere, in the mythologies, cosmogonies, traditions, and folklores of all races, and of all times. Heaven encloses the earth from without, as the shell encloses the yolk, or the earth's crust is the shell of the mundane egg. Burnet's whole theory of the earth was built on this idea. There is no end to the analogy between the egg and the universe, or to the concept of the earth as the egg of the world. These are some of the geometrical figures by which the earth and the universe have been represented, but shapes have also been used to describe it. Shapes are irregular things compared with geometrical figures, but they may be accurate nevertheless. Hair-shaped, for instance, is for descriptive purposes just as exact as triangular or round, and so the earth has been described and drawn not only as pear-shaped, but as boat-shaped, as heart-shaped, as egg-shaped, as tomato-shaped, as turnip-shaped, gourd-shaped, onion-shaped, lotus-shaped, rose-shaped. It has been many times a tree, a great island leaf with roots, a flower, a mountain, an octave in the cosmic series, or a note in the cosmic scale, or the living body of the God of heaven, the universal man, spanning the space between the highest heaven and the lowest earth. And for the last few hundred years it has been an oblate spheroid. But ask science today, what is the figure of Earth? And science will reply not with the geometrical figure of an oblate spheroid, nor with any definite shape drawn on the eye to see, but with a word. Earth is a geoid. Ask what is a geoid, and science will reply, an earth-shaped body. Ask what is an earth-shaped body, and science will answer, a geoid, a shape that is expressed by a word, but not yet by an image. The mysterious figure of the earth, the shape peculiar to itself, has not yet been determined, with all of man's questionings and guesses. 3. Creation of the world. And yet, he has tried to determine it, with that handful of working means left him when the gods departed, his vague knowledge of truth, which has served him better for determining what is not truth than what is truth. His numbers, his signs, his characters, his symbols, his words, his capacity to be curious, to wonder, and to draw analogies between strange things. This was his equipment when he first began to question space, and from this tiny handful of resources, all the creation stories of the world arose. Their outlines are remarkably the same. First of all, a primordial substance, and a former, to mold it. They sometimes called these two first forces the maker and the molder, each contained within the other, but at rest. Then, out of stillness came motion, out of motion, light, out of light, all created things. After creation, evil, and after evil, the deluge. Out of the deluge, the mountaintop, and out of the ruins of the old earth, the new. Many of the creation stories are familiar, but here are two which are almost unknown to the Western world, though one of them is of that very world itself. The first comes from Asia, land of the oldest recorded thought we have. At least, nothing older is recognized as coming from any other source. The second is of America, youngest, historically, of all the continents, with all her prehistoric past practically stripped of records. The first is in words, one of man's most magnificent guesses at the original combining of the great elements which produced the earth. The second is told in glyphs or pictographs. The first is taken from the Sanskrit Mahabharata, the second from the Walam Olam of the Lenape or Delaware Indians, a branch of the great Algonquin stock, which roamed from east to west and west to east in North America, and styled itself the sacred people, the mound builders. Vergu, in the Sanskrit epic, is answering the question, by whom was this world with its oceans, its firmament, its mountains, its clouds, its lands, its fire, and its winds created? He replies that, first of all, the primeval being, Manasa, created a divine being, Mahat. Mahat created consciousness. That divine being created space. From space was born water, and from water were born fire and wind. Through the union of fire and wind was born the earth. Then follows a song to Mahat. The mountains are his bones. The earth is his fat and flesh. The oceans are his blood. Space is his stomach. The wind is his breath. Fire is his energy. The rivers are his arteries and veins. Agni and Soma, otherwise the sun and the moon, are called his eyes. The firmament above his head. The earth is his 2 feet. The cardinal and subsidiary points of the horizon are his arms. Without doubt, he is incapable of being known, and his soul is inconceivable. Of the extent of the firmament, of the surface of the earth and of the wind, Vergu said, the sky thou seest above is infinite. The sun and the moon cannot see above or below, beyond the range of their own rays. There where the rays of the sun and the moon cannot reach are luminaries, which are self-effulgent, and which possess splendor like that of the sun or of fire. This space which the very gods cannot measure is full of many blazing and self-luminous worlds, each above the other. Beyond the limits of land are oceans of water. Beyond water is darkness. Beyond darkness is water again, and beyond the last is fire. Downwards, beyond the nether regions is water. Beyond water is the region belonging to the great snakes. Beyond that is sky once more, and beyond the sky is water again. Ever thus, there is water and sky alternately without end. Formerly, there was only infinite space, perfectly motionless and immovable. Without sun, moon, stars, and wind, it seemed to be asleep. Then water sprang into existence, like something darker within darkness. Then, from the pressure of water arose wind, as when an empty vessel without a hole appears at first to be without any sound. But when filled with water, air appears and makes a great noise. Even so, when infinite space was filled with water, the wind arose with a great noise, penetrating through the water. That wind, thus generated by the pressure of the ocean of water, still moveth, coming into unobstructed space. Its motion is never stopped. Then, In consequence of the friction of wind and water, fire possessed of great might and blazing energy sprang into existence, with flames directed upwards. That fire dispelled the darkness that covered space. Assisted by the wind, fire drew space and water together. Indeed, combining with the wind, fire became solidified. While falling from the sky, the liquid portion of fire solidified again and became what is known as the earth. The earth, or land in which everything is born, is the origin of all kinds of taste, of all kinds of scent, of all kinds of liquids, and of all kinds of animals. The Walam Olam, or red score of the Lenape, at first in that place, at all times above the earth. On the earth was an extended fog, and there the great Manito was. At first forever lost in space, everywhere the great Manito was. He made the extended land and sky. He made the sun, the moon, the stars. He made them all to move evenly. Then the wind blew violently, and it cleared, and the water flowed off far and strong, and groups of islands grew newly, and there remained. Anew spoke the great Manito, a Manito, two Manitos, to beings, mortals, souls and all, and even after he was a Manito to men and their grandfather. He gave the first mother, the mother of beings. He gave the fish, he gave the turtles, he gave the beasts, he gave the birds. But an evil Manito made evil beings only, monsters. He made the flies, he made the gnats. All beings were then friendly. Truly, the Manitos were active and kindly. To those very first men, and to those first mothers, fetched them wives, and fetched them food when they first desired it. All had cheerful knowledge, all had leisure, all thought and gladness. But very secretly an evil being, a mighty magician, came on earth, and with him brought badness, quarreling, unhappiness, brought bad weather, brought sickness, brought death. All this took place of old on the earth, beyond the great tidewater at the first. Long ago there was a mighty snake and beings evil to men. This mighty snake hated those who were there and greatly disquieted those whom he hated. They both did harm. They both injured each other. Both were not in peace. Driven from their homes, they fought with this murderer. The mighty snake firmly resolved to harm the men. He brought 3 persons. He brought a monster. He brought a rushing water. Between the hills, the water rushed and rushed, dashing through and through, destroying much. Nanabush, the strong white one, grandfather of beings, grandfather of men, was on the Turtle Island. There he was walking and creating, as he passed by and created the turtle. Beings and men all go forth. They walk in the floods and shallow waters, downstream, thither to the Turtle Island. There were many monster fishes, which ate some of them. The Manito daughter, coming, helped with her canoe, helped all as they came and came. And also Nanabush, the grandfather of all, the grandfather of beings, the grandfather of men, the grandfather of the turtle. The men were there together on the turtle, like the turtles. Frightened on the turtle, they prayed on the turtle that what was spoiled should be restored. The water ran off, the earth dried, the lakes were at rest. All was silent, and the mighty snake departed. Let us extract several of these primitive world pictures from the Walam Olam and set them side by side for comparison. Quite apart from any meaning attached to them in the legend of the Lenape, these 3 signs illustrate very well indeed what were probably the first 2 world concepts of man. Either that the earth was an island in a watery waste on whose waves the sky rested as best it might, or that it was a vast plain overarched by the solid vault of heaven and tightly enclosed within it. The first of the 3 needs only a writhing sea serpent inscribed beneath it to illustrate that heavy fear of primitive man, that portentous monsters, slipping through the deepest depth of the ocean, might creep under the edge of the firmament to work evil on earth. So little has ever been done with these Lenape pictographs, as Dr. Brinton himself admits, that it is impossible to speak with certainty about the real meaning of any of them, and it is only a hazardous guess to suggest that Figure 29, the last sign of the deluge story, the water ran off, the earth dried, the lakes were at rest,
How many cases
all
do you
was
use with
silent,
these guys?
and the mighty snake departed, may represent the ocean surrounding the earth as barred, perhaps forever, against the mighty snake which had wrought such desolation.
Dude, what is the result with what?
The oblique lines would serve here instead of an earth-surrounding mountain wall or a circular continental ring beyond the river ocean to guard the earth against invasion from without. In any case, here are primitive representations of mountains of the world. The first earth, before, and the first earth, after the deluge, and of that other first concept of the earth as a vast plain, overarched by the solid vault of heaven. There is another creation story that we might glance at here, because it contains so many notions of the beginnings of things that are extraordinarily similar to other ideas we shall meet later on. It is the creation story of the Maidus, an Indian tribe of Northern California. When this world was filled with water, so Dixon translates the tradition, Earthmaker floated upon it, kept floating about. Nowhere in the world could he see even a tiny bit of earth. No persons of any kind flew about. He went about in this world, the world itself being invisible, transparent like the sky. He was troubled. I wonder how, I wonder where, I wonder in what place, in what country, we shall find a world, he said. You are a very strong man to be thinking of this world, said Coyote. I am guessing in what direction the world is. Then, to that distant land, let us float, said Earthmaker. In this world they kept floating along, hungry, having nothing to eat. You will die of hunger, said Coyote. Then he thought, no, I cannot think of anything, he said. Well, said Earthmaker,
He's a kitty.
the world is large, a great
He's
world.
a kitty.
If somewhere I find a tiny world,
kitty.
I can fix it up.
Want
Then
some
he
food?
sang, where, little world, art
That's
thou?
delicious, huh?
It is said he sang, kept singing, sang all the time. Enough, he said, and stopped
Here you go.
singing. Well, I don't know
That's
many
delicious,
songs, he
man.
said.
You know it.
Then Coyote sang again, kept
Yeah, I do.
singing, asking for the world, singing, where, O world, art thou? He sang, kept singing. Then, enough, he said, I am tired. You try again. So Earthmaker sang, where are you, my great mountains, my world mountains? He said. He sang, and all the time kept saying, where are you? He stopped singing. Enough, he said. You try also. Coyote tried, kept singing. My foggy mountains, where one goes about, he said. Well, we shall see nothing at all. I guess there never was a world anywhere, said he. I think if we find a little world, I can fix it very well, said Earthmaker. As they floated along, they saw something like a bird's nest. Well, that is very small, said Earthmaker. It is small. If it were larger, I could fix it, but it is too small, he said. I wonder how I can stretch it a little. He kept saying, what is the best way? How shall I make it larger? So saying, he prepared it. He extended a rope to the east. To the south, he extended a rope. To the west, to the northwest, and to the north he extended ropes. When all were stretched, he said, well, sing, you who were the finder of this earth, this mud. In the long, long ago, Robin Man made the world,
They're fucking evil still.
stuck earth together, making this world. Thus mortal
Like,
man
you're talking
shall
about it
say of you,
actively over
the
there.
myth-telling.
I made like 12 of them.
Then Robin sang, and his world-making song sounded sweet. After the ropes were all stretched, he kept singing. Then, after a time, he ceased. Then Earthmaker spoke to Coyote also. Do you sing too? He said. So he sang, singing, my world where one travels by the valley edge, my world of many foggy mountains, my world where one goes zigzagging hither and thither, range after range, he said. I sing of the country I shall travel in. in such a world I shall wander, he said. Then Earthmaker sang of the world he had made, kept singing, until by and by he ceased. Now, he said, it would be well if the world were a little larger. Let us stretch it. Stop, said Coyote. I speak wisely. This world ought to be painted with something so that it may look pretty. What do ye two think? Then Robin Man said, I am one who knows nothing. Ye two are clever men, making this world, talking it over. If ye find anything evil, ye will make it good. Very well, said Coyote. I will paint it with blood. There shall be blood in the world, and people shall be born there, having blood. There shall be birds born who shall have blood. Everything. Deer, all kinds of game, all sorts of men without any exception. All things shall have blood that are to be created in this world. And in another place, making it red, there shall be red rocks. It will be as if blood were mixed up with the world, and thus the world will be beautiful, he said. What do you think about it? Your words are good, he said. I know nothing. So Robin Man went off. As he went, he said, I shall be a person who travels only in this way. And he flew away. Only after all this was accomplished did Earthmaker, commanding Coyote to lie down on his face, began to stretch the world. With his foot he extended it to the east, to the south, to the west, to the northwest, and to the north. And yet again saying to Coyote, do not look up, you must not. He stretched it again, as far as it would go in the 5 directions. Then Coyote, rising, began to walk to the eastward side, and Earthmaker, after describing the entire circuit of the world, returned to the spot from whence he had set out, and began to prepare things. He made men of different colors, 2 of each kind only, and as he made them in pairs, he counted them. Then he counted all the countries, and as he counted them, assigned them, gave them to the countries. You are a country having this name. You shall have this people, he said. This sort of people, naming you, shall own the country. These people shall grow, shall keep on growing through many winters, through many dawns. They shall continue to grow until their appointed winters being past, their dawns being over, this people having finished growing, shall be born, he said. So Earthmaker created to each country a name and a people with a name and speech, each different, until he arrived at the middle of the world, where he made 2 others and left them, saying, Ye here, growing steadily, when so many winters shall have passed, very many winters, many days, ye shall be fully grown, he said. Then ye shall be mortal men, ye shall be born full grown. Ye shall not be born soon, he said. Continuing on his way to the uttermost limit where mortal men were to live, he stopped and created, first 2, whom he laid down, and 2 more, and still another pair. Ye shall remain here, he said, and your country shall have a name. Although living in a small country, in one that is not large, it shall be sufficient for you. This I leave, and growing continually, ye being fully grown shall be born, he said. Then your food will grow, different sorts of food, all kinds of food, and ye being born with sufficient intelligence will survive, said he. Then he pushed them down under a gopher hill. He spoke again. Ye too shall possess a small country. Come now, leave this country. This ye must not say to others wishing to take this land. Ye shall be people who will not drive others away, driving them off to another country. Ye shall be different. Ye shall name your country. To still another pair he spoke, saying, Ye shall have children, and when your children shall have grown larger, then, looking all over this country, ye must tell them about it, teach them about it, naming the country and places, showing them and naming them to your children. That is such and such a place, and that is such and such a mountain. So when ye have caused them to learn this, teaching them, they shall understand even as ye do yourselves. Then, placing them between his thumb and finger, he snapped them away. And when he had given countries thus to all that he had counted out, there was 1 pair left. Ye also, ye shall be a people speaking differently. There will be a little too many of you for you to have the same sort of a country also. So ye shall have that kind of a country, a great country, he said. Now wherever I have passed along, there shall never be a lack of anything, he said, and made motions in all directions. The country where I have been shall be one where nothing is ever lacking. I have finished talking to you, and I say to you that ye shall remain where ye are to be born. Ye are the last people, and while ye are to remain where ye are created, I shall return and stay there. When this world becomes bad, I will make it over again, and after I make it, ye shall be born, he said. Long ago, Coyote suspected this, they say. This world will shake, he said. This world is spread out flat. The world is not stable. After this world is all made, by and by, after a long time, I will pull this rope a little. Then the world shall be firm. I, pulling on my rope, shall make it shake. And now, he said, there shall be songs. They shall not be lacking. Ye shall have them. And he sang, and kept on singing until he ceased singing. Ye mortal men shall have this song, he said. And then he sang another, and, singing many different songs, he walked along, kept walking until he reached the middle of the world, and there, sitting down over across from it, he remained. But in making the world, Robin Man sang that which was pleasant to hear. He, they say, was the first created person, a man whose song passed across the valleys, a man who found the world, a man who in the olden time sang very beautifully, sounding songs. An earthmaker, going along and having passed by the middle of the world, made a house for himself and remained there. That is as far as he went. That is all, they say. Upholders of the world. Lemurian's old drawing of the earth floating is a peculiarly desolate rendering of the ancient idea that the earth was nothing more than an island in a sea. This idea would of course have its probable origin among races living near great seas or oceans, whose other side they had tried in vain to reach. The mind of man likes symmetry. If water stretching endlessly away bounded one side of their island, even though that island were a continent whose other edge they did not know, water must also lie on its other sides. If the sun rose from their eastern waters, say at dawn, it must shrink in some unknown western waves at night, if for no other reason than by swimming through them, to arrive again by the next dawn in the eastern sky. We may smile at this childish notion if we will, but it may very well be that no great system of the harmonious orbits of sun and moon and earth explain the mystery of the rising and the setting of the sun any more or any better than the primitive idea that darkness came when the sun was submerged in the sea, and that light came when the sun sprang out of the sea. Perhaps all that we know today, really know, is that in the hour of the dawn the sun appears, and in the hour of twilight the sun has vanished. The precise nature of the element to be a matter of concern and much speculation. At first it was assumed to be simply water. Later it was defined as water or some other liquid. And finally it was believed to be a liquid not unlike the composition of the waters directly under the firmament or lower heaven, which were supposed to be a crystalline, congealed water, specially combined to resist the flame of the sun, moon, and galaxy of stars. To be itself full of fire, and yet not to burn. It was water, yet not water, air, yet not air, fire, yet not fire. Probably this was an attempt to describe the medium in which the island moon floated, all-sustaining, yet clear. Doubtless, too, the roundness of the sun and moon, their disks so broad, yet thin enough to float in space, or ethereal waters, had as much to do with giving men the idea that the earth's shape might also be flat and round, as the circular defining line of the horizon. Again, if the moon was like a leaf floating in the heavenly water, the earth, like a leaf, floated on the world water, and like a leaf in water would develop roots. Ages ago, as we have already noted, the ancient world, India, China, Egypt, made the lotus the water flower that symbolizes earth and heaven and all that lies between. For as a tree rooted in the earth is a part of it, so earth rooted in the universal waters must be a part of the universe from which it derives life and nourishment. And again, though the roots of an earth island might not be as firm as the roots of a great earth tree might, that is, be as supple and flexible as those of water plants, nevertheless it was an anchorage of the earth to something outside itself. Naturally evolving from this would rise an earth set on solid pillars, an established, firmly founded disk. Figure 32 is an old picture of just such an earth, the earth of the Vedic priests. Its upper side is its only habitable side. Its underside rests on 12 columns, these columns resting in turn on the 12 great sacrifices of the virtuous, the aimful deeds, that is, of men aware of duty. Without this subterranean foundation, said the ancient priests, the pillars of the earth would dry up, and the earth would fall down. These pillars, say Flammarion, accounted more reasonably for the rising and the setting of the sun than the rather lazy guess that it swam through water from west to east every night, though there was another speculation that it might reach the eastern heavens by traversing a complicated system of tunnels, like great connecting caves, which pierce the earth disk from Occident to Orient. But the 12 pillars, quite as little as the roots of the earth island leaf, failed to satisfy man's wonderings over the problem of what supported the earth, or on what the earth rested. One of the old familiar figures of earth is that hemispherical earth of the Hindus, supported on the backs of 4 elephants, which stand on the hemispherical shell of a gigantic tortoise, floating on the surface of the world waters. Sometimes, in addition to these 3 supports, there is a 4th, the coiled ring of the great world serpent on which the tortoise rests. 4 foundations for earth, and 5 for heaven, which must rest on the earth. But the elephant, the tortoise, and the serpent are only 3 of the great animals which folklore and tradition say may support this planet. The Altaic people of northern Siberia affirm that their mighty Ulgan created the earth on the waters and placed under its disk, to support it, 3 great fish, one in the center and one on either side. The head of the middle fish being placed towards the north, floods occur there when it presses its head down, and, should it ever sink too low, the whole earth will be deluged again. They believe that these fish are attached to heaven by a rope through their gills, whereby their heads can be lowered or raised, and that, at the 3 posts of heaven to which these ropes are tied, the Bodhisattva Mandashire, or guardian of earth, always watches. According to another tradition, only one great fish supports the earth. When he changes his position, earthquakes occur. In Hebrew myths, this mighty animal is the fish-shaped Leviathan. Where the turtle or the tortoise is unknown, as in far northern lands, the world-supporting frog will take its place. If its finger ever moves, the earth shivers. Among Tartars and many of the tribes of Asia and Europe, the earth is believed to be supported by a great bull. Sometimes the earth rests on its back. Sometimes it is held aloft on the horns. Or another variation in the world ocean, there is a great fish, and, upon the fish, a bull which bears the earth. Or again, in the world ocean, there is a giant crab which gives support to the earth-bearing bull. Some say that the terrible weight of the earth has already broken one of the great horns, and that when the other breaks, the world will come to an end. Another of the Tartar tribes says that after the great mammoth was created, it was found that the earth was not strong enough to bear its weight, and so, to avoid a waste of creation in the universe, the great rulers solved the difficulty by commanding the great mammoth to bear the earth. On what did the earth rest? Not only on literal water and great beasts, on a whirlwind, said Empedocles, on roots rooted in the infinite, said Xenophanes, on a soul of the world, said Plato and his school, on 12 pillars, said the Vedic priests, which must have for their foundation the sacrifices of the virtuous. Earth, that is, depended ultimately on man for its support, and sooner or later, in all cosmologies and mythologies, we come upon some lurking or developed concept that the burden of supporting both earth and heaven rests on the shoulders of man. In countries as widely separated by race and by oceans as Greece and Mexico, we find an Atlas of the world, a sustainer of the universe. In Greece, it is Atlas the Endurer, brother of Prometheus, the rebel bringer of fire, who supports the globe. Son of Poseidon, he knew the depths of the whole ocean world. It was his task to guard the pillars which held heaven and earth apart. According to one story, it was because he had attempted to storm the heavens that he was condemned to carry its vault on his head and hands. According to another version, it was only after the loss of his great island realm, Atlantis, that he was forced to become the sustainer of the sky. Mexico appears to have had 4, at least, heaven-bearing gods, and each of these appears to have exercised a number of functions, other than the sufficiently onerous one of supporting the universe. Quetzalcoatl, although a sun god and an earthquake god, was also, like Atlas, a water god. If Atlas, interpreted, means the endurer, Quetzalcoatl, interpreted, means heart of the sea, god of the sun, of the earthquake, and the water. He also upheld the heavens of the Mexicans. In the Eastern world, and in the Western, thousands of years ago, these different races believed alike that some great force, never to be understood and never to be overcome, had wrenched the heavens from the earth, but that, at the same time, it separated them. It united them by another force, which each race represented by a human figure, a great man-god. Explain it as we will, call it naive or arrogant, it expressed one of man's few entirely admirable qualities, his lonely necessity to share, or to believe that he shared in the work of carrying on the universe, and it found expression in countless ways. A curious old drawing of the Middle Ages shows how the Atlas myth persisted even into modern time. The Earth still occupies the center of the universe, with all the other heavenly bodies revolving about it. From pole to pole of the firmament, his head marking the Polus Arctic, and his 2 feet, the Polus Antarctic, stretches Atlas, or the macrocosm, or the great man, or Adam Kadmon, whichever you will. To medieval Europe, Atlas represented the macrocosm, or the long great world, in contrast to the microcosm or man, little but the epitome of all that had combined to produce him. Very often in such circular designs, the 2 lower corners will be filled, each with a toiling figure, the burden-bearer man, with his shoulders bent to the wheel. Only by his microscopic effort, they seem to say over and over again, may the wheel of life be kept revolving. Not only does the earth, the pillared earth of the Vedic priests, rest on the sacrifices of man, but since heaven itself leans on the earth, without man's aid, the whole universe must collapse. It is easy to see how this ancient image of the great man rose before the eyes of the little men of the earth. This was a being infinitely stronger, infinitely better, almost yet not quite a god because he was man, who somehow stood or moved between the 2 worlds and kept them in touch with one another. He came to be called by many names, to be pictured under many disguises. He was the being praised in the creation chant of the Mahabharata. He was the Manitou to men and their grandfather of the Lenape creation story. He was the cosmic Pa'an Ku of the Chinese, who came into being in the midst of the cosmic egg, whose very name, Pa'an, means the shell of an egg, and who has hatched out of the cosmos. He created in the middle, out of the pure elements, heaven, out of the mixed elements, earth. Every day heaven grew 10 feet higher, earth 10 feet deeper, and he 10 feet taller, for 18,000 years. When he died, his breath became wind, his voice thunder, his 4 limbs the 4 directions, his 5 extremities the 5 sacred mountains, his left eye the sun, his right eye the moon, his blood the rivers, his beard the stars, his hair the trees and plants, his flesh the soil, his teeth metals, his bones rocks, his marrow precious stones, his perspiration rain, and his parasites men. The old Chaldeans drew a great man across the sky in such a way that the signs of their zodiac corresponded to the parts of his body, and proof once again that the ancient peoples, separated by the earth's diameter from each other, were inexplicably one in many of their fancies. The Tewa Indians regarded Opa, the world, the universe, as a living being. and worshipped it as the universal man, whose backbone, they said, is the Milky Way. And the Old Norse sagas have in their giant Ymir almost the facsimile, or it may be the original, who may say, of the Chinese Pa'an Ku, for from Ymir's body was made the world, from his flesh the earth, from his blood the rivers and oceans, from his bones the mountains, from his eyebrows the encompassing of Midgard the earth, from his skull was shaped heaven, and his brains were changed into floating clouds and fogs. What is interesting about all of this is the fact that primitive man arrived without the aid of science at the tremendous idea that definite figure is an attribute of the heavens. It was the idea that so fascinated Herschel, discoverer of Uranus and curious inquirer into the mysteries of the Milky Way. He was possessed by the guess that not only is our galaxy a stratum or confined bed of stars, but that this stratum is measurable, and that by comparison of his gauging or sounding lines, he might actually draw a chart of it. He guessed again that, in the main, and this guess was wrong, the stars are scattered equably throughout our immediate space, which would mean that, seeing as far in one direction as another, the figure of the heavens would tend towards a circular form. In an old book of 1848, Thoughts on Some Important Points Relating to the System of the World, by John Nickel, there is a very odd figure of the universe, based on Herschel's gauging system, which illustrates as well as any other the method employed. If, says Nickel, we were in the center of a circular group, it would mean that whether we looked through the line CA or the line CB, the number of stars that could be counted would be the same. But if the group were an irregular one, the number of stars in the direction of CA would be much less than that along the line CB, and the proportions of their numbers would give the proportions of the two lines CA and CB. Supposing S, lower figure, the place of our sun, or, says Nickel, what is the same thing of the earth, on which the observations are recorded, let a number of lines be drawn answering in direction to the position of Herschel's telescope, and in length to the number of stars revealed in that direction. Then, if the extremities of these lines were joined, the result would be a figure which, however strange, must approximate to a section of our vast and dazzling vault. He goes on to imagine one with the power to depart from Earth, proceeding through space towards the Milky Way, leaving behind the constellations which we know, coming upon new configurations, passing even through the Milky Way until, looking back, he sees this universe so dwindled away as to present the appearance of nothing but a speck in space, shining with a faint, irregularly diffused illumination, corresponding in its rays to the outlined figure. Naturally, most of the early stories of the great man of the heavens are odd mixtures of perception and fancy, of clumsy literalness and real imagination. All too often, this Opa being was more earthly than heavenly, much more man than God, but whatever his guise or disguise, he was always much more than man, and in some of his incarnations he was very close to divine. As Adam Kadmon, he has meant not only the first man created in the true image of God, but something more, the divine man-forming power, capable of transforming a questioning little man cut off from wisdom into a divining great man who could know. Precisely such a conception of Adam Kadmon had been lying in Robert Flood's Microcosmi Historia since 1619, a very clear demonstration of the three kinds of vision in the microcosm, or soul of man, of the location of their objects, and of the manner of discerning them. Surely no figure of earth was ever drawn before or since so lightly poised, so ethereally supported. Unless it is the tiny figure of earth as the end and the beginning of the spiral world, which immediately follows in the Microcosmi Historia, another demonstration showing how the soul rises in a spiral ascent from the sensible things of the world to unity, through 22 stages, beginning with the earth and ascending upwards to God, that is, from multiplicity to unity. This is drawn in 22 whorls or grades, beginning by numbers with Terra and ending with Deus, or by the order of the Hebrew alphabet, beginning with Deus and ending in Terra. These spiral grades or stages each have 4 signs to mark them. First, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, beginning with the outer whorl and winding continuously inward to the center. The Hebrew alphabet, according to the Kabbalah, is based on the primitive alphabet in which gods were letters, letters were ideas, ideas were numbers, and numbers were perfect signs. Second, the names of the procession of grades, from the first manifestation of the Godhead, mens or mind, to its final expression in terra or earth. Third, numbers from 1 to 22. Fourth, the tiny winged heads, common to each completed whorl. The spiral, reaching from heaven to earth, is shown here as lying in a flat coil, like a spring, but it may be re-imaged as the winding line described about a sphere that tapers irresistibly out to a point. It is just that line, says this figure, described by a point moving in space, beginning in heaven and ending in earth, which at once separates and unites them. Beyond earth there is nothing, but in earth there is everything, even the power to make the descending spiral an ascending one. It can be re-imaged as an ascending vine, climbing back by way of the great world tree. For life, said the ancients, flows never in one way. Rooted in heaven, it descends to earth, and rooted in earth, it may ascend to heaven. Five, the primeval earth. Because it pleaseth more and makes a greater impression upon us, wrote the old English Platonist Thomas Burnet, to see things represented to the eye, than to read their description in words, we have ventured to give a model of the primeval earth, with its zones or greater climates, and the general order and tracks of its rivers. Not that we believe things to have been in the very same form as here exhibited, but this may serve as a general idea of that earth, which may be wrought into more exactness, according as we are able to enlarge or correct our thoughts hereafter. The rivers of that earth, you see, were in most respects different, and in some respects contrary to ours. And if you could turn our rivers backwards, to run from the sea towards their fountainheads, they would more resemble the course of these antediluvian rivers, for they were greatest at their first setting out, and the current thereafter, when it was more weak, and the channel more shallow, was divided into many branches and little rivers, like the arteries in our body that carry the blood. They are greatest at first, and the further they go from the heart, their source, the less they grow and divide into a multitude of little branches, which lose themselves insensibly in the habit of the flesh, as these little floods did in the sands of the earth. This is a very curious conception of the countercourse of primeval rivers. It is exactly as if we conceived of the Missouri-Mississippi system, for instance, as rising in the Gulf of Mexico and flowing north until it begins to divide and subdivide into dozens of lesser streams, all of which finally dwindle away into the earth instead of rising from it. What was the state of primeval earth before man appeared, and with him, trouble? All the creation stories give a common answer: harmony. Harmony of all the spheres. It is in the song to Mahat, with its ordered account of the separation of the five great elements from chaos, and their recombinings into the bodies of the universe. He made them all to move evenly, says the creation legend of the Lenape, after the great Manito had formed land and sky and moon and stars, and in the pictograph, the even movement in a spiral line. In Sebastian Münster's Cosmographia Universalis, 1559, at the beginning of the chapter on the creation and the disposing of the primordial earth and sea, is an old drawing evidently intended to show the paradisiacal state of terrestrial affairs at the end of the fifth day of creation, with the great stage built and the great scene set and lighted for the entrance of man and the beginning of his drama. It is a picture in successive planes of the Genesis story, with a charming addition: the boat with sails floating in the foreground, and on it a little three-storied house, the ark, perhaps, whose part in the coming drama had been already foreseen by the Creator, and which was to become, of all the vanished treasures of a drowned and broken earth, man's single precious possession. Six, the Babylonian universe. What people at what time first imagined the Earth as a hollow hemispherical shell floating on the world waters, we cannot know. But it is another of the oldest figures of Earth. The idea of the Earth as boat-shaped had its origin probably in the almost universal myth of the deluge. The transition from an ark floating right side up to the Earth itself, a boat floating upside down, is an easy one. But boat-shaped is a word which, thanks to our modern patterns, has lost its early significance. The ancient world had, however, among a certain people, a boat built on exactly such a hemispherical model. Today, on the Euphrates River, these same kufas float, the round boats of the ancient Chaldeans, stretched and sewed into a hollow hemisphere. And today, likewise on the same river, fishermen ride at ease on the same inflated cushions or airboats of skin that were in use thousands of years ago. Nothing skimmed the waters more swiftly than these circular boats, and nothing floated more safely than these hollow hemispheres of stretched skin upturned on the waters. There is a curious relation between the ancient boats and the Assyrian story of the creation. If these boats were hemispheres of stretched skin, so were the heavens and the earth. Merodach, the world maker of this legend, lay for a long time helpless like the other gods under the blind rule of chaos, Tiamat, from whom sprang everything and who created unceasingly, but who had yet created neither heaven nor earth. From her issued spontaneously monstrous animals and figures, men with 2 wings and others with 4, with 2 faces or 4, with goat's legs and horns, or with hind parts of a horse and the 4 parts of a man, animals with human heads or fishes' tails, other forms in which every sort of animal shape was united in confusion, and this confusion of creation, run mad, never ceased. But finally, Merodach rose, alone of all the gods, to meet her, and then it was that space witnessed its most terrific combat. He finally slew her, but matters were hardly bettered, for Tiamat's great dead body stretched throughout all space. He placed his foot upon her, reads the Assyrian story, and with his unerring knife he cut into the upper part of her. Then he cut the blood vessels, and caused the blood to be carried by the north wind to the hidden places. He contemplated the great corpse, raised it, and wrought marvels. He split it in 2 as one does a fish for drying. Then he hung up one of the halves on high, which became the heavens. The other half he spread out under his feet to form the earth, and immediately all the creatures that were in her disappeared. Merodach again surveyed the empty world. Then he cut off his own head, and having kneaded the blood flowing from it with the earth, formed men, who were thus endowed with a surviving particle of understanding and with a surviving particle of divine thought. This odd conception of the heavens as made of skin is found over and over among primitive races. The Yakuts say that the sky is made of several skins, tightly stretched and overlapping. The Buryats call the Milky Way a stitched seam in the sky, and they speak with awe of a certain being who murmurs from time to time, "Long, long ago, when I was young, I sewed the sky together." The picture of the Kufa is given to make clearer what most of the writers on the old Akkadian cosmogony mean when they say, the Akkadians, or Chaldeans, considered the earth to be hollow and boat-shaped, for boat-shaped meant to them no elongated oval figure, but distinctly a hollow hemisphere, a round shell, even a stretched skin. Plate 7b on the next page shows Meyer's construction of their world on just this model, and his interpretation is followed below. Briefly, E is the convex side of the hollow earth shell. From C to E stretches the lower firmament, or zone of the atmosphere. Winds, storms, and clouds. This zone rests firmly upon the convex earth shell. From C to A is the upper firmament, divided into 2 layers. From A to B is the zone of the spirit of the heavens, and from B to C is the zone of the planets, sheep, or wanderers, or watchers. This is the zone also of lightning and of thunder. A in this diagram represents the zodiac, which is in space and the great celestial ocean, called also the deep and the abyss. Thom, the great dragon of this great sea, was also called Tiamat, and it was really looked upon as the primordial abyss out of which everything in the universe, including heaven and earth, came. The arrangement of the 7 planets between B and C are, according to Meyer, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, and Earth, the center. FF is the concave side of the Earth's shell, with 7 zones described answering, says Meyer, as shadows to the orbits of the 7 planets. This was the realm of the king of the ghost world, the king of the dead. Curiously enough, it was believed to have been ruled over at one time by Ea, deity of wisdom. G was the nadir, and I was the mountain of the east, or the mountain of the world, which supported the upper firmament and the great celestial ocean, and 1 was the mountain of the east, or the mountain of the world, which supported the upper firmament and the great celestial ocean. 2 is the great chaotic crystalline sea, extending to an unknown distance beyond the zodiacal zone. 3 is the pivot of the star zone on top of the world mountain, upon which the firmament revolves. 4 are the guarded plates to the underworld, abode of the dead, or home of the dark spirits, or a place of punishment. Yet in it are concealed the waters of life, and through this region of the underworld, the nightly journey of the sun takes place, from west to east. Disregarding any number of merely technical differences between them, this diagram of Meyer's will serve as a fair picture of any cosmogony based on the idea that the Earth is a hollow hemisphere with an underworld. But there is a sharp disagreement over whether, after all, the ancient Assyrian people, certainly the Chaldeans and Babylonians, believed that the Earth was a hemispherical shell, or whether they believed that it was something quite other than that. Babylon was mighty, and it perished utterly. Of all its wisdom, only battered fragments of text remain, which present-day scholars have worked for years to interpret. Within a period of just 20 years, from 1888 to 1908, 8 different diagrams of the supposed figure of this Babylonian universe were offered by 8 different men, of which Meyer's diagram was the first. The last of these is Dr. William Fairfield Warren's, first published in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, 1908. As he points out, no 2 of the other 7 agree. Certainly, no one of the other 7 bears any likeness to this beautiful construction of 8 crystalline spheres surrounding a cubical, pyramidal, antipodal earth figure. For the reconstruction of the Babylonian universe, he says, we have no less than 12 most valuable data derived from the study of ancient Babylonian texts. Following is an abstract of the 12 data on which he modeled this translucent universe. 1. In the Babylonian conception of the universe, the Earth occupied the central place. It was the accepted center of their planetary system. 2. The northern half of the Earth was called the upper, associated with life and light. The southern half was called the under, associated with darkness and death. The south and the underworld are identical. 3. The upper or northern half of the Earth was regarded as consisting of 7 stages, or tupacati, ranged one above the other in the form of a staged pyramid. The staged temple of Nippur, according to Sayce, was a model of the Earth according to the belief of those who built it. 4. Correspondingly, the Antarctic, or under half of the Earth, was supposed to consist of 7 similar stages. The 7 tupacati of the underworld are a facsimile of the 7 tupacati of the overworld. 5. Like the quadrilateral temple modeled after it, the Earth of the Babylonians was 4-cornered. In this particular, it agreed with the conception ascribed to the ancient Egyptians, Hebrews, Chinese, and to the Indo-Aryans of the Rig Veda period. 6. In Babylonian thought, there were 7 heavens and 7 hells. This belief is one of untraceable antiquity. 7. Above the 7th heaven was another, the highest heaven, that of the fixed stars, called by the Babylonians the heaven of Anu, after the name of one of their oldest and highest gods. 8. This 8th heaven was divided by the zodiac into 2 corresponding portions, an upper or Arctic and an under or Antarctic. At the upper pole, Anu had his palace and throne. 9. In Babylonian thought, the north pole of the heavens was the true zenith of the cosmic system and the axis of the system upright. Consequently, The diurnal movements of the sun and moon were regarded as occurring in a horizontal plane. 10. Proceeding outward from the known planets was as follows: Moon, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. That their respective distances from the Earth were not uniform was already known. 11. In order to pass from the upper half of the Earth to its under half, that is, from the abode of living men to the abode of the dead, it was necessary to cross a body of water, which on every side separated the two abodes. 12. According to Diodorus Siculus, the Babylonians considered that the 12 designated stars south of the zodiac stood in the same relation to the dead as do the 12 corresponding stars north of the zodiac to men in the land of the living. This representation clearly makes the living and the dead the residents respectively of antipodal surfaces of one and the same heaven-enclosed earth. According to the Babylonian creation tablets, Anu and Ea are antipodally located gods, Anu being enthroned at the north pole of the heavens, and Ea at the south pole. These 12 propositions, says Dr. Warren, are the fundamental features of the ancient Babylonian world concept, and each of the 12 requirements is met by this figure. The upright central line represents the polar axis of the heavens and earth in perpendicular position. The two central 7-staged pyramids represent the upper and lower halves of Kur, the earth. The upper is the abode of living men, the lower the abode of the dead. The separating waters are the 4 seas. The 7 dotted half circles above the earth represent the 7 heavens, and the corresponding 7 hemispheres below the earth, the 7 hells. The 7 inner concentric spheres are respectively the domains and abodes of Sin, Shamash, Nabu, Ishtar, Nergal, Marduk, and Ninib, each being a world ruler in his own planetary sphere. The order of these spheres has been given above as Moon, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The outermost sphere, with its upper half cut away, as are the upper 7 heavens, to show better the interior of the system, is the sphere of the antipodal gods, Anu and Ea, and the heaven of the fixed stars. It is to be noted further, Dr. Warren explains, that the space between the spheres widen rapidly at each remove from the earth, so rapidly that in a worldview the size of this, they cannot be represented other than as in this plate. Dr. Warren calls this the Babylonian universe, principally because Babylonia is almost the limit of our backward reach to the wisdom of the past, and our retracing of the persistent recurrences of so many of these principles, the 4-cornered earth, or the cubical earth, the 7 heavens, earth and counter-earth, the crystalline spheres, the mountains of the world, and so on, and there. But its origin, he says, was among a people antedating the Babylonians. A truer name, therefore, for the system would be the pre-Babylonian. The East Semites received it from their predecessors in the possession of the Euphratean Valley, the Akkado-Sumerians. At least such is the opinion and the teaching of our highest experts. Did the system originate among those non-Semitic predecessors in the valley? This has been assumed, but no man can pretend to know. 7. The Egyptian Universe. In the Metropolitan Museum of the City of New York rests the gray diorite sarcophagus of Uresh-Nufor, one-time priest of the watery goddess Mut in Egypt. On the upper half of the sarcophagus lid is engraved the figure of the sky goddess Nut, bending over the earth, a marvelous picture of the Egyptian universe. The sky goddess Nut bending over the earth, and the succeeding plate, the goddess Nut represented double, bring up so clearly the first of the major traditional catastrophes of the earth that it would be timely just now to consider them briefly. There have been 5, one so dimly related that it shall be left till the last. But there are 4 great timeless traditions of great disasters. The first is the violent separation of earth from heaven. The second is the appalling earth-moon catastrophe. The third is the deluge. And the fourth is the sinking of Atlantis. Or it may be the third in point of time is the sinking of Atlantis, and the fourth is the deluge. Or again, it may be that these two catastrophes, though individual, were coincident with each other. Tradition, however, is, happily, not logic, and so, even a disorderly order, we may take up the outstanding afflictions of the planet we call Earth. First, then, the violent separation of Earth from heaven, which these Egyptian world pictures illustrate so beautifully. Nut was goddess of the starry sky. Sometimes she is represented as powdered with stars, sometimes, as here, with but a line of them along her spine, once at least on the sarcophagus lid of Uresh-Nofir, with the 3 discs or spheres of universal significance, body, spirit, soul, connected by 8 stars, and by 6. Sometimes the band of stars was accompanied by a band of water flowing over her spine, the celestial Nile, as the Egyptians called the mysterious heavenly waters that covered the world. Sometimes the path of the celestial Nile is called the path of the Milky Way, and often the path of the Milky Way is called the path of souls. Through her husband, Seb, she gave birth to the sun, which was ever after reborn each morning. Daily it made its journey from east to west beneath her body until, sinking below the western horizon, it passed into the mouth of Nut, traversed her body during the night, to be born again at dawn. Nut also gave birth to the moon, which came forth from her breasts as milk, and to countless other heavenly bodies as well, whose genealogy would take us too far. This is the story of Nut, or heaven, and of Seb, or earth. In the beginning, that stirless rest in which all myths of the original creation begin, heaven and earth were together, wedded gods, from whom was to spring all that has been, is, and shall ever be. Time was not yet, sings one of the old world hymns, nor universal mind, nor thought, nor word. Bliss was not, misery was not. Darkness alone filled the boundless all, for Father, Mother, Son were once more one, and the Son had not yet awakened for the new wheel and his new pilgrimage. The universe was still concealed in the divine thought and the divine bosom. But the day of creation came, and a new god, Shu, god of air or of sunlight, sprang out of the primordial waters. He slipped between the two, and tearing Nut with force from the body of Seb, her husband, raised her to the sky. Her star-spangled body marked the extent of the firmament, and her hands and feet hanging down were the 4 pillars of the firmament and the 4 quarters of the earth. There, ever since, she has remained, bending over the earth, eternally watching the earth and the children of the earth. Of Seb, the earth, it is related that he did not endure the violent separation from Nut without a struggle. He sought to rise that he might fight and overcome the newly created god. But as he struggled, just roused from deep, dreamless sleep, he was arrested and held in the curious position he has ever since maintained, without power to change it. He has been veiled each spring with plants and herbs and grasses, and winter has wrapped him in ice and snow, while along his back has passed the endless panorama of the generations of animals and men. Through him is given to them all they have. He gives and they ungratefully take, never asking if he has a need they might supply, a sorrow they might soothe. Often he sleeps, and, sleeping, dreams of Nut, forgetting for a time his grief and pain, forgetting for a time that between him and his mate, forever separating them, stands Shu, god of air or of sunlight. But he may never again sink into dreamless sleep. Sooner or later, the circle of his dreams rounds on itself, and he is roused by pain to his state of suffering again. This is why Earth eternally questions heaven until, wearied and waiting for answers that never come, he sinks again into slumber. Some say that heaven answers Earth when he dreams, but because the path of his dreaming is a circle, he has forgotten most of heaven's answers when he awakes. And some have quite another story of Seb, the earth, namely, that Seb is concealed under the form of a colossal gander, whose mate laid the sun egg, and perhaps still lays it every day. Or again, there is another story of Shu, which is that, as the divine son, he had later in his turn begotten Seb and Nut, the 2 deities he had separated. Such then is the first catastrophe. Every religion has recognized it, that the earth is cut off, disinherited, a troubled, troublesome, perturbed, perturbating, turbulent, storm-swept, dream-sodden, staggering, breathless, complaining planet, and that all of its children have inherited its qualities. Eight, Earth-Moon Catastrophe. The second catastrophe to afflict the Earth in the beginning of things was the Earth-Moon Catastrophe. And this, by the way, is not only one of the most ancient of traditions, but it is also a modern theory of causes with which science has been flirting for half a century. So difficult is it to find anything new, even a new theory which cannot be traced back along some old tangled thread of folklore. It is difficult, however, to find anything older in man's consciousness than the riddle of the moon. What is it, that changeless, ever-changing, flat-faced disk in the sky, forever turning about the earth, yet never turning its other face to the earth? What mysterious other world, underworld, overworld, dead or alive, lies on its secret side? What is the relation of the moon to the earth and to man? What the relation of the hidden life of the earth and of man to the moon? Tradition had doubled these two bodies as a pair acted upon by the sun, long before astronomers had given us the image of Earth-Moon as a beautiful double planet moving among the stars, long before mathematicians had constructed from the interrelated pull of the sun and moon and earth the baffling problem of three bodies, before which many a wise man has fallen. Here is the ancient story of the genesis of the moon. Long after the separation of heaven and earth, and while earth was still in process of being made ready for human life, but before man had yet been created, it chanced that the line of its course in the heavens was crossed by that of a great comet, and that, by some heavenly accident, the two enormous bodies collided. The terrific impact resulted in the cracking of the earth's hard shell, and a huge fragment, some traditions say too, was torn away as violently as newt was torn, in the Egyptian myth, from the body of Seb. This fragment of earth promptly went into space and became known as the moon, and ever since that time, earth and moon, mother and daughter, have been following each other through the heavens. As to which is the pursued, which the pursuer, old accounts vary. But there is always the stable myth of Ceres and Proserpina to fall back on. Very soon after Galileo made the first drawing of the moon in 1610, John Wilkins, Lord Bishop of Chester, devised a highly curious little book entitled The Discovery of a New World in the Moon, or a discourse tending to prove that 'tis probable there were another habitable world in that planet. Wilkins bulwarks his guess with similar ones of the ancients. Pythagoreans in general did affirm, he says, that the moon also was terrestrial, and that she was inhabited at this lower world. To this opinion of Pythagoras did Plato also assent. We may read often in him and his followers of an Aethera Terra and a Lunaris Populi, and ethereal earth and inhabitants in the moon. As their world is our moon, so our world is their moon, he declares, and quotes others of antiquity, whose heavens and Elysian fields were there, where the air is most quiet and pure. In the frontispiece to his book, he attempts to show just this relation between them. He goes back to the old Greek myth of the earth, and calls the two Ceres and Proserpina. By the fable of Ceres, he says, continually wandering in search of her daughter Proserpina, it meant nothing else but the longing desire of men who live upon Ceres, earth, to attain a place in Proserpina, the moon or heaven, and he held that 'tis possible for some of our posterity to find out a conveyance to this other world, and if there be inhabitants there, to have commerce with them. Buffon seems to have been the first of modern scientists to voice the modern theory of the genesis of the moon from this then moonless planet. He followed the push of tradition and made a comet responsible for the split. This was in the 18th century, but in 1879, George H. Darwin lifted tradition to the dignity of a hypothetical guess and suggested, as a part of his theory of tidal evolutions, that the moon was formerly a part of the earth, that it was originally much nearer the earth than it is at present, and is now slowly receding from it. That at the time of the separation of the Earth into the Earth and Moon, the planet was hardly larger than it is today. That it was hot, solid, ellipsoidal, with an interior more or less liquid, revolving on its axis once every 4 or 5 hours, its density increasing and its volume diminishing as it cooled. That, as its volume lessened, its speed of rotation increased, until by centrifugal force the Moon was born, carrying with it, in its flight into space, 3/4 of the Earth's crust. A good deal of interesting discussion followed this new type of Darwinian theory, and a number of scientists began to speculate on the precise place of the origin of the Moon, granted that Darwin was right. Of course, and here again tradition guided them, or had at least preceded them, they chose the Pacific Ocean basin that holds apart the scarred coastlines of western North and South America and Eastern Asia, the East Indies, New Zealand, and the Antarctics. One of these speculators amused himself to good purpose. Plate 12 at right shows George D. Swayze's extraordinarily imaginative quarter Earth, which remained after the Moon had flown, cracked by great lines of cleavage that were to slowly split the plastic floating crust into 2 major continental masses. Among the old drawings of the Moon, it is difficult to choose. They are all so beautiful. One drawing, however, must always stand for an example of the miracles man has wrought in this quest of his. The first drawing of the Moon, made in 1610 by Galileo through his glass. That tiny lens, compared to the gigantic telescopes of today, amounted to considerably less than a child's toy. But it magnified a surface 3 times, and with it Galileo essayed to prove or disprove Aristotle's theory that the form and images of the ocean appear in the Moon, as in a mirror. Leaving aside these terrestrial things, he said, I have directed my researches towards the heavens, beginning with the Moon. He decided very quickly that the Moon had no mirror-like surface, for he discovered mountains, circular hollows, and many bright spots which he compared to the eyes in a peacock's tail. Before he died, he had succeeded in making a glass which magnified surfaces 32 times, and it was not long before the surface of the Moon was mapped out and named. It was a world so similar in many of its formations to those of the Earth that its first map maker, Hevelius, simply transferred to the Moon the names of the cities and seas and mountains of the Earth. But Riccioli, in 1651, renamed its mountains and craters and supposed lakes and seas, not after places of the Earth, but after the learned men of the Earth, choosing rather to place their names in the sky. Instead of lunar Alps or Apennines, there arose on the Moon great mountain ranges, or plains, or craters, bearing the names of Plato, Ptolemy, Copernicus, Kepler, Tycho. Instead of lunar seas called Caspian, Mediterranean, and the like, there were instead the seas of storms, of clouds, of rains, the seas of tranquility, of serenity, and the lake of dreams, enchanting names which linger to this day. Nine, the deluge. The third and fourth catastrophes of the Earth are the deluge and the sinking of Atlantis. Atlantis, the fabulous continent, not the little island remnant. Their time sequence in the old traditions is a little mixed, not that it matters. Suppose we take first the deluge. The comet, that blazing terror of the skies, that erratic wanderer of the heavens, has always been given more than its probable share of blame for terrestrial bad luck. It has been called the cause of the birth of the Moon. It has also been held responsible for the universal deluge. This is another of those untraceably old traditions, but we begin with the comet of 1680 and the remarkable egg laid at Rome on December 4th of the comet year, because this comet and this egg are responsible for 2 theories of Earth written within the next 20 years, both by Englishmen. William Whiston worked out a complete theory of a deluged, because comet-riven, Earth, and Thomas Burnet developed his theory of Earth as the mundane egg whose broken shell unlocked the waters of the deep. The evidence in the case is at hand in the shape of the elaborate frontispiece of Lettre d'un gentil homme des provinces à une dame de qualité sur le sujet de la comète. a brief little labor of informative love published anonymously in 1681, but known now to have been written by Claude Francois Manistrere. An extraordinary freak of nature, it reads, occurred in Rome at the time of the appearance of the comet, in the palace of the Maximi, which was seen by His Holiness, by the Queen of Sweden, and by all persons of the first rank in Rome. The design of it was sent to Paris, as an entirely new thing, by a person greatly interested and worthy of confidence. On the 4th of December, 1680, in the palace of the Maximi, a hen laid an egg on which could be discerned the figure of the comet, accompanied by other markings such as are here represented. All the most skilled naturalists of Rome saw and examined it, and found it to be a freak of nature unique and unparalleled. It is left to the curious gentlemen of Paris to make profitable use of it, and to seek the cause. Now, it has always been extremely difficult for the extremely exact among the theorists to account for the sources of waters great enough to bring about a universal deluge. No rains of 40 days and nights explain it, even when these rains from heaven are united with all the external waters of the earth. There were, to be sure, the fountains of the great deep, but how were they to be broken up? And it is said that the comet egg of this comet year gave good Will Whiston the idea he needed for solving the mystery of the deluge. He published in 1690 a new theory of Earth, in which he set forth the other main cause of the deluge, the breaking up of the fountains of the great deep, by the deadly weight of the waters in the tail of a comet active in the heavens while Noah was building the ark. For when the near approach of the comet to the earth had rendered the shape of that internal dense fluid on which its upper crust rested so very oblong and oval, and its surface so much larger than before as to occasion the opening of its perpendicular fissures, which are visible at this day, the vast weight of the additional waters from the comet would attempt to press this upper earth deeper into the dense fluid below, and so join the subterraneous to the cometical waters, for the supply of a quantity sufficient for so vast a purpose as that of a universal deluge. Whiston went even farther in his cometical theory. He supposed the earth to have been originally a comet, to have had a lopsided form without beauty or proportion, subject to all the misfortunes of comets, sometimes 1,000 times hotter than melted iron, at other times 1,000 times colder than ice. These alternations of hot and cold were chaos, a dense though fluid atmosphere which surrounded the solid contents of the earth, and which was in a state of continuous agitation and shock from its unharmoniously mingled substances. It was the comet's atmosphere, or tail, filled with water, which struck the earth and broke its surface, and Whiston describes minutely just how the antediluvian comet involved the antediluvian earth in its tail, until all of earth, even the mountain of the world, was submerged. Burnet's theory of the earth as the mundane egg will come farther on, but no better place could be found in this collection of world pictures than just here, for one of his beautiful drawings of the deluge, the second chaos, when, upon this chaos rid the distressed ark that bore the small remains of mankind, a ship whose cargo was no less than a whole world. It is at once a picture of the deluge after the dove was sent forth from the ark, and a rough globe, a delicate tracery of the broken earth seen through water, as one looks down into a clear lake. There are vague, glinting hints of lost or sunken continents that never emerged when the earth dried and the waters ran off. A misty figuration of the new earth, its pattern defined long before the Ark of Noah came to rest on Ararat, with some lost Lemuria, some sunk Atlantis, some shattered Pan or Mu still lingering along the declining edges of the continents about to be. Many of the modern maps of the Atlantean and Lemurian lands resemble very much this drawing of Burnet's, where continent seems to overlay continent until the oceans seem little more than spring floods in mountain valleys. Burnet speaks of Plato, who supposeth his Atlantis to have been greater than Asia and Africa together, and yet to have sunk all into the sea, and he concludes that great alterations in the face of the land and the sea would take place for a long time after the deluge, that many of the fragments of land would change their posture, and that there would be a succession of sinkings and eruptions and lesser floods until all became poised and settled once again. 10. The Lost Atlantis. The fourth, or the third, catastrophe of the world tradition is the sinking of Atlantis, the great prehistoric continent. A generation ago, scientists would have smiled at the idea of taking this particular tradition seriously, but they do not smile today. They give the theory the Scotch verdict, not proven. Even that conservative storehouse of factual knowledge, the Encyclopedia Britannica, says of this tradition, it is impossible to decide how far this legend is due to Plato's invention, and how far it is based on facts of which no record remains. Fortunately for us, however, world pictures are not based on proven facts, or they would never have been drawn, and Plato's story of the lost Atlantis, even if eventually proved true, will always remain one of the most charming of fantasies. If you have not read it, in the Timaeus and the Critias, read it. His story of a golden world when men were sons of gods and had not lost their heritage, of a civilization that soared to heights of knowledge ours has never known, and sank. A few escaped this continental deluge. Atlas escaped, says the old story, to support heaven and earth, in order that the universe might not sink also. Everyone has seen somewhere Kircher's drawing of the island of Atlantis. This was the last remnant of the continent, which tradition says sank 12,000 years ago, but it is doubtful that anyone has ever seen it reproduced as it appeared in his Mundus Subterraneus of 1678. It is always reversed, relettered, and made to conform to the right geography. The ship in the upper right-hand corner is turned bottom side up and made to lie at anchor in the lower left-hand corner. Let the old mistake stand, if mistake it was, and mistake it was surely. Turning it upside down will put everything into right relation with modern geography. Only the ship will be wrong, like a mirage in the waters. Plate 16 below is Kircher's accompanying illustration of ocean mountains, whose highest peaks may be island remnants of sunken continents, a little ground plan of the ocean floor. Kircher, whose bold guesses on things he could not prove brought him less fame than blame, guessed again on the combined problems of the deluge and lost continents, and in his Arca Noé, 1665, presented in a world map a conjectural geography of the Earth's translation after the flood, from the opinions of various geographers, to which the author subscribes. Plate 17 at the end of this chapter. This is a very odd map, by the way, and one evidently little known to modern geographers. Imagine a little German scholar sitting in Rome under the shadow of St. Peter's during the 30 Years' War, and guessing simply not only at the form and extent of the then discovered but by no means explored Americas, and not only at the form and extent of the still unknown Arctic and Antarctic continents, but also at the conformation and extent of the ocean mountains, and of the sunken antediluvian continents. To say he guessed wrong is to say a little less than nothing. This map represents more clearly than his little drawing of Atlantis his then novel theory that the lost island had been situated west of Gibraltar, and that the Canaries and the Azores are today its only remnants. But what it really does, of course, is to send the conjectural Atlantean continent straight west into the Americas, and almost across them. Who knows? We are still guessing, and the Mayan excavations are furnishing golden material for further guesses. It may very well be that half a century from now this old guess map of Kircher's will be even more interesting than it is today. According to the beautiful maps of W. Scott Elliott, Kircher's map may serve as a guide for Scott Elliott's slightly different theory. The Atlantean continent extended from a point a few degrees east of Iceland to approximately the site of Rio de Janeiro in South America, and across the ocean to the African Gold Coast. It took in Texas and the Gulf of Mexico, the southern and eastern states of America, up to and including Labrador, and stretched across the Atlantic to the British Isles, embracing Scotland, Ireland, and part of northern England. Atlantis is, by this assumption, the parent land of America, a great continent surrounded by water at a time so far away as that in which the Sahara Desert was an ocean floor. '11. The Lost Land of the West. But there is another obscure tradition of a fifth catastrophe, which seems to have antedated the sinking of Atlantis. This concerns another lost continent in the Pacific Ocean, a great catastrophe in the western waters. Old records are riddled with allusions to vanished lands and peoples of the West. Old Aztec and Mayan records, that is. The Asiatic records speak of the vanished lands and peoples of the East. This old tradition appears first in modern times through the assumption of Sclater, an Englishman seeking for some lost links, that long, long ago, a great southern continent lay stretched about the South Pole very much as the continental land today surrounds the Arctic zone. He named this continent Lemuria, to fix more firmly thereby his supposition that on such a continent, animals of the Lemuroid type must have been developed. It is a curious instance in scientific history that when Ernst Haeckel, most material of materialistic scientists, came upon this Lemurian hypothesis, he promptly incorporated it into his own working scheme, and in his The History of Creation and the Evolution of Man, he speaks of Lemurian creatures and Lemurian traces, as if the existence of such a land had already been scientifically proved. His explanation, which failed to satisfy all scientists, was that the Lemurian time cycle otherwise inexplicable gaps in the evolutionary theory. The prehistoric, pre-Atlantean continent existing, if it existed, hundreds of thousands of years ago, has also been called the continent of Pan. In Oaspe, a new Bible in the words of Jehovah, published by John Ballou Newborough in 1882, there is a world map showing the location of this lost Pan in the Pacific Ocean. Oaspe makes its sinking coincident with the deluge. The sacred people of Pan, the Ihins, otherwise the Algonkins, had been warned of the coming flood and were building ships in which to escape. 138 arks of the deluge sent out from this continent of Pan. In the same day the gates of heaven and earth were opened, and the earth rocked to and fro as a ship at sea, and the rains fell in torrents, and loud thunderings came up from beneath the floor of the world, and the vortex of the earth closed in from the extreme, and lo, the earth was broken. A mighty continent was cut loose from its fastenings, and the fires of the earth came forth in flames and clouds with loud roarings. And the land rocked to and fro like a ship at sea, and again the vortex of the earth closed in about on all sides, and by the pressure the land sank down beneath the water to rise no more. The Algonkins, oddly enough, have a fascinating word with a fascinating meaning for just such shadowy fables as these. It is only Nitatahaku, they say, which is to say, I relate a fable. I am telling an old story invented for amusement. This dim continent has also been called the continent of Mu. And by this dim continent, I do not mean to say that Lemuria and Pan and Mu, or even that conjectural western crust of the earth from which the moon hypothetically sprang, are identical except in this way, that they all hang together on the same thread of tradition, that something at some far distant time happened in the center of the space that is now called the Pacific Basin. We have already seen that a serious modern scientific theory assigns the origin of the moon to this planet, and that a supplementary theory suggests the Pacific Basin as the place of the split. We have seen too that a southern continent, antipodal to Atlantis, has been assumed by evolutionists because something like it had to be assumed. Colonel James Churchward's recent book on the lost continent of Mu is a unique and serious study of this traditional catastrophe in the western waters, carried over a period of 50 years, during which time he collected all the collectible evidence on this theme, that once upon a time in the Western Ocean, a great continent went down to rise no more. His material is very interesting. Long-forgotten sacred tablets of India describe, he says, among other things, the creation of man in the land of Mu, the mother country of humanity, which land was not the land of Asia. Records of later date describe the destruction of the land when the earth's crust was broken up by earthquakes and then sank into a fiery abyss. Then the waters of the Pacific rolled in over her, leaving only water where a mighty civilization had existed. He finds the land of Mu mentioned by Plato. He finds the land of Mu, or lands of the West, in the Truano manuscript, an ancient Mayan book, and in the Codex Cortesianus, another Mayan book. He finds it in the Lhasa record and in hundreds of other writings in all parts of the world, including India, Egypt, Greece, Central America, and Mexico. He says that this continent was a vast one, extending from the north of Hawaii down towards the south, a line between Easter Island, with its massive sculptured stones for which no man has ever accounted, and the Fijis, formed its southern boundary. It measured over 5,000 miles from east to west, and over 3,000 miles from north to south. The continent consisted of 3 areas of land, separated from each other by narrow seas or channels, and on it dwelt 64 million people divided into 10 tribes or peoples. It was called the Empire of the Sun, and it was the center of the whole Earth's civilization, of its learning, its art, and its commerce. Its great cities were 7, and its people, being skilled navigators, had sent out colonists to all parts of the earth. But the final one of a series of earthquakes came to Mu, and Colonel Churchward quotes from old records. The whole continent heaved and rolled like the ocean's waves. The land trembled and shook like the leaves of a tree in a storm. Temples and palaces came crashing to the ground, and monuments and statues were overturned. The cities became heaps of ruins. As the land rose and fell, quivered and shook, the fires of the underneath burst forth, piercing the clouds in roaring flames 3 miles in diameter. They were met by lightning shafts, which filled the heavens. A thick black pall of smoke overshadowed the land. Huge cataclysmic waves rolled in over the shores and extended themselves over the plains. Cities and all living things went down to destruction before them. Agonizing cries of the multitude filled the air. The people sought refuge in their temples and citadels, only to be driven out by fire and smoke. And the women and the men in their shining garments and precious stones cried, "Mu, save us." During the night, the land was torn asunder and rent to pieces. With thunderous roarings, the doomed land sank. Down, down, down she went, into the mouth of hell, a tank of fire. As the broken land fell into that great abyss of fire, flames shot up around and enveloped her. The fires claimed their victim. Mu and her 64 million people were sacrificed. These are the 5 great traditional catastrophes of Earth. After each one of them, according to tradition, the generation of man began again. Again he began to rebuild his world. Again began the quest for the knowledge, even for the crafts that he had lost. Almost like the first men of Earth, he questioned the silent heavens, with no knowledge or wisdom of his own to aid him in his questions or their answers. Nothing but vague old tales of something that had happened in a recordless past which had robbed his fathers of a heritage and had put him where he was, ignorant and alone. What and how and why? Trees of the world. There are 2 universal world figures found everywhere among all races, the world tree and the world mountain. For man could draw analogies, his traditions prove it almost better than his written records. He knew that he had been born, that he was living, that he must die, yet of birth he remembered nothing, and death he would not know until too late. But in the animal world, above all in the vegetable world, he could watch the recurrent miracles of life and death, rebirth and growth, sleeping and waking states, more easily than he could note the same miracles in his own sphere. And so he came very early and easily to see a correspondence between humanity, greatest of the animal world, and the tree, mightiest of its kingdom. It is true that in every great cosmological system, and in great and lesser cosmogonies, there stands the figure of the world tree, with its seed, its roots, its trunk, its resting perches, its knitting knots, its pith, its main branch, its leaves, its flowers, and their sweet smell, its refreshing shade, its immortal sap, and the spot where it grows, all brought into close and exquisite analogy with man and his universe. Without doubt, sings one of the greatest of the Vedic poets, though possessed of density, trees have space within them. The putting forth of flowers and fruits is always taking place in them. They have heat within them, in consequence of which leaf, bark, fruit, and flower are seen to droop. They sicken and dry up. That shows they have perception of touch. Through sound of wind and fire and thunder, their fruits and flowers drop down. Sound is perceived through the ear. Trees have, therefore, ears and do hear. A creeper winds round a tree and goes all about its sides. A blind thing cannot find its way. For this reason, it is evident that trees have vision. Then again, trees recover vigor and put forth flowers in consequence of odors good and bad, of the sacred perfume of various kinds of dupas. It is plain that trees have scent. They drink water by their roots. They catch diseases of diverse kinds. Those diseases again are cured by different operations. From this, it is evident that trees have perception of taste, as one can suck up water through a bent lotus stalk. Trees also, with the aid of the wind, drink through their roots. They are susceptible of pleasure or pain, and grow when cut or lopped off. From these circumstances, I see that trees have life. They are not inanimate. Fire and wind cause the water thus sucked up to be digested. Accordingly, again, to the quantity of water taken up, the tree advances in growth and becomes humid. In the bodies of all subtle things, the 5 elements occur. In each, the proportions are different. According again to the races of men, the type of the world tree varied. The date palm was the sacred Asherah of the Assyrians. To the Greeks and to the Norsemen, the cosmic ash was the world tree. But also to the Greeks and to the Germans, the oak was the life giver and the life sustainer. And the Greeks made the vine the sacred tree of Dionysus. Persian legends center about the Haoma tree, and the Egyptians had a mythical golden gem-bearing tree of the heavens, where the sky goddess Nut had her abode. The Japanese believed that a great metal pine grew far to the north at the center of the world, and the Russians have a legend of an iron tree, whose root is the power of God, and whose head sustains the 3 worlds, the heavenly ocean of air, the earth, and hell with its burning fire. To the branches of the jambu, or rose apple tree, the Hindu dead clung and climbed to immortality. India has also her incredible banyan tree, declared to be more like man than man himself. Unlike plants, man can move at will over the surface of the earth, but this sacred Indian fig tree bears the name of the tree of many feet, because its seed, rarely rooting in the ground, ordinarily sends down its hanging garden of roots from its nest in the crown of palms, where it has been deposited by birds. These aerial roots, touching the earth, sink into it, glide through it, and from it spring upward again to send down other drooping branches that root themselves, and so, over and over, until the prodigious grove, myriad parts of a single tree sprung from one air-nested seed, eventually destroys the palm that cradled it. Countless books have been written about the origin of the myth of the cosmic tree, but the gist of them all can be stated very briefly. First of all, heaven and earth are separated. They must be, therefore, at one and the same time held apart, lest the heavens fall down and crush the earth, and they must be also united by some subtle path of communication, some bridge over the monstrous interval. If a mushroom, delicate as a butterfly, can work a miracle in a night and raise a rock, a tree rooted in the earth may support the sky, but no tree of earth could reach to heaven unless it were itself divine, born somehow of the gods. And so we find a host of literal parent trees, said to be produced from the body moisture of deities, and capable, therefore, in their turn of producing man. In its more developed form, this parent tree became the tree of life, the tree of knowledge, offering men immortality and the wisdom of the gods. There is a Tibetan tree called Tarayana, or the way of safety, which grows by the side of the great river separating the worlds, and only by grace of its overhanging branches may men pass from the mortal to the immortal bank. The oldest world tree? Who shall say? When in search of the oldest, we always think of the ancient East, but no one can assert and prove that Yggdrasil, the cosmic ash, the world tree of the Norsemen, had its origin in the Orient. However, remarkably, its ideas coincide with the sacred trees of Asia. Let us begin for a change with the Occident and the Yggdrasil, the chief and most holy seat of the gods, say the Eddas, is by the ash Yggdrasil. There the gods meet and counsel every day. It is the greatest and best of all trees. Its branches spread over the world and reach above heaven. 3 roots sustain the tree and stand wide apart. One is with Asa, the second is with the frost giants, the third reaches into Niflheim, and under it is Hvelgumar, where Nidug gnaws the roots from below. But under the second root, which extends to the frost giants, is the well of Mimir, wherein knowledge and wisdom are concealed. The third root of the ash is in heaven, and beneath it is the most sacred fountain of Erd. Here the gods have their doomstead. The Asa ride thither every day over the Bifrost, which is also called Asa Bridge. There stands a beautiful hall near the fountain beneath the ash. Out of it come 3 maids. These maids shape the lives of men, and we call them the Norns. On the boughs of the ash sit an eagle, who knows many things. Between his eyes sits the hawk, called Vedfulner. A squirrel, by name Ratatosk, springs up and down the tree and bears words of hate between the eagle and Nidug. 4 stags leap about in the branches of the ash and bite the buds. The Norns that dwell by the fountain of Erd every day take water from the fountain, and clay that lies around the fountain, and sprinkle therewith the ash, in order that its branches may not wither or decay. There are a number of interesting things to note here, because of their constant recurrence in other world concepts widely separated in time and race. One is the close association of the world tree with the world mountain. One springs from the other, take them in what order we will. Another is the division of the universe into 9 worlds. Another, for the sake of comparison with the Mayan world tree farther on, is the squirrel Ratatosk. Another is the Bifrost, or Asa Bridge. In the beginning of all things, says the Norse story of creation, there were 2 worlds, Niflheim, the world of ice in the north, and Muspelheim, the world of fire in the south, with all the space between an empty abyss called Ginnungagap. The fierce flames in Muspelheim blew constantly over into the abyss many sparks which confronted only nothingness, until from the ice-bound Niflheim a great spring opened and sent down 12 rivers, some of which flowed into the abyss and formed great layers of frozen vapor. At last the sparks of fire met the frozen air, and Ymir the giant was created, and then, in turn, from Ymir's flesh the earth was formed, and from his bones the hills, the heaven from the skull of that ice-cold giant, and from his blood the sea. Of the 9 worlds, Asgard was the highest and was the world of the gods. Below it was Midgard, or Earth, the world of men, a flat disk surrounded by the river ocean. Beyond the river ocean, but surrounding Midgard, was Jotunheim, the upper giant world, and beneath the earth plane was the great underworld divided into 4 worlds. In the north was the lower giant world of Niflheim. At the south, Erd and her 2 sisters ruled over the kingdom of the dead, and between north and south was Mimir's land, where dwelt the wisest of the gods, and with him day, night, dawn, and the sun and moon. Below Niflheim again was the world of torture, and below Erd's realm of the dead, the land of subterranean fire. Just 2 things bound these worlds together, the tree Yggdrasil, and the Asa Bridge, or Bifrost, and the third, the spirit of heaven, the great energizer, passing ever to and fro, guiding, controlling all the universe, from the first world to the 9th, at home everywhere, abiding nowhere, stirless when moving, and moving when still, that, without which there would be nothing, here shown as merely a tiny, timid, nimble squirrel. But what was the binding and the separating bridge, the Bifrost? Again, who knows? Its arch was over Asgard, world of the gods, its northern tip resting upon the mountains of the ice-girt Niflheim, its southern end in the realm of the dead, where Erd and her sisters ruled. Some say the Milky Way is the original Bifrost, or the Trembling Bridge, as some say the Milky Way is the very trunk of the celestial tree. Others believe that the rainbow is the prototype for Bifrost and all the bridges of the world, for the world bridges are as universal as the trees and mountains of the world. Earth was cut off from heaven, yet somewhere, if man could only find it, there was a path that might lead back home. The Bifrost at its northern end was inviolably guarded by the great Heimdall, world judge or world divider, whose ears were so good that he could hear the grass pushing up through the ground and the wool growing on the backs of sheep, and he needed less sleep than a bird. The gods crossed it every day on their way to the judgment hall in the realm of Erd, but the way was barred against all others, lest some thief in the night should find his way into heaven. Yet it was the bridge also on which the souls of all the dead began their passage to the land of Erd. The Persians had their Shinvat bridge, which is to say also the bridge of the judge, over which all souls, good and evil, passed. That bridge, says one of their sacred books, like a beam of many sides, of whose edges there are some which are broad, and there are some which are thin and sharp. Its broad sides are so large that its width is of 27 reeds, and its sharp sides are so contracted that in thinness it is like the edge of a razor. Muhammad, too, placed a way over the middle of hell, which is sharper than a sword and finer than a hair, over which all must pass. Certainly, the North American Indians considered the Milky Way to be the bridge to the land of souls, a great village situated where the sun sets. They call the Milky Way Chitpai and Meskanu, the path of souls, because they think that the souls raise themselves through this way in going to that great village, wrote Paul Lejeune in 1634 of the Montagnes. 100 years later, Pierre Aulnois wrote of the Crees of Upper Lake Superior that they believed in a paradise of feasts and great hunts for the immortal souls of the dead. But before reaching it, there is a spot of extreme peril. The souls have to cross a wide ditch. One side of the way is full of muddy water, offensive to the smell, and covered with scum, while on the other, the pit is filled with fire, which rises in fierce tongues of flame. The only means of crossing it is on a fir tree, the ends of which rest on either bank. Its bark is ever freshly moistened and besmeared with the substance which makes it as slippery as ice. If the souls who wish to cross to the enchanting plains have the misfortune to fall at this dangerous passage, there is no help left. They are doomed forever to drink of the foul, stagnant water, or to burn in the flames, according to the side on which they fall. Sometimes the bridge-building fiend makes the bridging spar a snake or a swinging log. A sketch of the world by a Thompson River Indian illustrates this exactly. They believe that the earth is square, level in the center and rising towards the north, from whence comes the cold, that it rises also in great mountain ranges about its borders, and that these mountains or lands are topped by mountains of air, the clouds and mists rising from the encircling lake of the world. All the rivers of the world rise in the north and flow south. This trail to the soul world has been minutely described by James Teat in his The Thompson River Indians of British Columbia. According to him, the country of souls is underneath us, towards the sunset, and its path is one of perils, storms, narrow bridges, and gaping chasms. The trail leads through a dim twilight. Along it are always visible the tracks of the people who last went over it, and also the tracks of their dogs, if they had any with them. It winds along until it meets another road, which the shamans or medicine men, their nearest approach to priests, use as a shortcut when trying to intercept a soul. From here on, the trail is much smoother and straighter, and is painted red with ochre. Farther on, it winds to the westward, descends a long, gentle slope, and ends at a wide, shallow stream of very clear, mirror-like water. This stream is spanned by a long, slender log, on which the tracks of souls may be seen again. After crossing the bridge, if the traveler is fortunate enough to hold his footing on the slippery edge between the worlds, he finds himself again on the trail, which is now an ascending one. At a certain height is heaped a great pile of clothes. This marks the spot on the journey where the souls must leave behind them all that they have brought from the other world. And from here on, the trail not only seems level, but little by little the dimness and twilight confusion disappear. 3 guardians are stationed along the trail of the souls, one on each side of the river that must be crossed, and the third at the very end of the trail of the ghosts. The first of these, on the hither side of the stream, has built for himself a sweat house where he finds most of his time. It is the duty of all 3 to send back to the land of the living any soul not yet ready to enter the land of the dead, even though he may have, by some miracle of accident, crossed the bridge, For sometimes it happens that a soul succeeds in passing the first two guardians, only to be turned back by the third, who is the chief of the three, and who now and then, being a great orator, sends back messages to the world of the living through the medium of souls who, having survived all other tests of courage and merit, fail in the final test of being judged worthy by the guardian of the gate of life to pass through. But, having been permitted by him to pass, the soul at last reaches a large lodge at the end of the trail. It is made of a hard white material, like limestone or white clay. It extends a long distance from east to west and is much shorter from north to south. Its top is like a round mound or anthill. The doors to this white lodge are at the east and west, and the trail leads up to the eastern door, which is very small, barely large enough to let a soul pass through. But the western door, through which the soul passes to the land of ghosts, is much higher and wider. Through the entire length of the lodge there is a double row of fires, for when the deceased friends of a person expect his soul to arrive, they go in a body to this lodge to talk about his death and prepare to welcome him. As the newly arrived soul reaches the entrance to the lodge of the dead, he finds someone standing at the door to greet him and call him by name, while others sing, dance, and beat upon drums. The air is always pleasant and still, and it is always light and warm. There are sweet smells of flowers, and abundance of grass and berry bushes laden with ripe fruit. The rest is hunting, feasting, and dancing through eternity, for the dancing, or immortal souls. The wak-wak tree is a fabulous tree growing on a fabulous island somewhere in the Southern Ocean, or somewhere near Japan, or near the western or the eastern coast of Africa. It all depends on the traveler who tells the legend. It appears to have had nothing to do with America or the American Indians. Yet here is a curious bit of Sioux lore, which, in connection with one of the legends of the lost continent of the Pacific, has an odd interest here. The Sioux Indians have a special reverence for what they call the Wakada cedar. Wakada, according to W.J. McGee, who has made a special study of the world in his The Siouan Indians, is a very curious word indeed. It has, he says, as many connotations as the Sanskrit word karma, and, like karma, is not to be translated by any single English word. The sun, for instance, is not the or a Wakada, but simply Wakada. So is thunder, so is lightning, the stars, the winds, and especially Wakada cedar, by which they mean precisely the state of being which makes a cedar human and more than human. Even a man might be Wakada. The term, he says, may be translated by mystery more satisfactorily than by any other single English word. Nevertheless, with its vague implications of power, sacred, ancient, grandeur, animate, immortal, not even an English sentence of ordinary length could quite convey the sum total of the aboriginal idea expressed by the term Wakada. Perhaps all its meaning is conveyed when, applied to the cedar, they say it is the state of being which makes a cedar human and more than human. Now, of the wak-wak tree which bore human fruit, Turkey, Arabia, Persia, and India all had a tradition that in the Southern Ocean or some other unexplored waste of waters was an island called Wak-Wak, or a great mountain called Wak-Wak, because on it grew a tree which produced fruit with a human head, or fruit in the form of a human body, or even in the form of animals. And these beings at dawn and at sunset cried aloud so that all might know the passage of the sun, Wak-Wak. The island and the mountain are mentioned in The 1001 Nights. Hassan al-Basri went there to find his wife and children. The tree is described without being named by Friar Ordorico of Pordenone, who in the 14th century left Italy to make the grand tour of the East. Arrived at Malabar, he wrote thus, "And here I heard tell that there be trees which bear men and women like fruit upon them. They are about a cubit in measurement, and are fixed in the tree up to the navel. And there they be, and when the wind blows they be fresh, but when it does not blow, they are all dried up. This I saw not in sooth, but I heard it told by people who had seen it." Plate 19 gives a drawing of the Wak-Wak tree, taken from an old Turkish history of Western India and its wonders, published at Constantinople in 1729. It represents the fruit of this fabulous tree not by human heads, but by 7 pendant bodies. The 2 great birds at the foot of the tree are as fabulous as the rest of it. Sometimes these souls were imagined as suspended with their heads downwards, alive but clinging and climbing on a reversed path back to heaven. In an old Hindu legend, it is related that Garuda, lord of all birds, cursing one day towards a gigantic banyan tree with the fleetness of the mind, to sit thereon and eat the elephant, and the tortoise, in alighting, broke one of the branches. As it broke, he caused it and saw to his wonder that a tribe of rishis, called Vadakilyas, were hanging from it and head downwards, engaged in ascetic penances. And gathering together all of his strength, the Lord of Birds soared high into the heavens with his burden of hanging men and saved them. Sometimes when the air is quiet, trees will move and their leaves rustle. This very common phenomenon had for the ancients a mystic meaning. At such times, the invisible souls were talking to each other of their trials and triumphs on the journey back to heaven. In their sketch of the world, the Thompson River Indians incorporated one form of the world tree. In the bridge between the worlds, literally the path of life. The Osage Indians in their chart of the universe have another. Few world pictures can be found more simply and beautifully drawn than this by Redcorn, with its earth plane, its stages or heavens, and its tree of life. Like the Lenape pictograph, it is the score of a tradition chanted by members of a secret society of his tribe. It is explained by J. Owen Dorsey as follows. The tree at the top represents the tree of life. By this flows a river. The tree and the river are described later in the degrees. When a woman is initiated, she is required by the head of her gens to take 4 sips of water, symbolizing the river. Then he rubs cedar on the palms of his hands, with which he rubs her from head to foot. If she belongs to a gens on the left side of a tribal circle, her chief begins on the left. Announcing the sacred name 3 times. Then he repeats the process from her forehead down, then on the right side of her head, then at the back of her head, 4 times, 3 times, or 12 passes in all. Beneath the river are the following objects. 1. The Watsituka, male slaying animal, or morning star, which is a red star. 2. 6 stars called the elm rod by the white people in the Indian Territory. 3. The evening star. 4. The little star. Beneath this are the moon, 7 stars, and sun. Under the 7 stars are the peace pipe and the war hatchet. The latter is close to the sun, and the former and the moon are on the same side of the chart. 4 parallel lines extending across the chart represent 4 heavens, or upper worlds, through which the ancestors of the Sichu people passed before they came to this earth. The lowest heaven rests on an oak tree. The end of the others appeared to be supported by pillars or ladders. The tradition begins below the lowest heaven, on the left side of the chart, under the peace pipe. Each space on the pillar corresponds with a line of the chant, and each stanza at the opening of the tradition contains 4 lines. The first stanza precedes the arrival of the first heaven, pointing to a time when the children of the former end of the race were without human bodies as well as human souls. The bird hovering over the arch denotes an advance in the condition of the people. Then they had human souls in the bodies of birds. Then followed the progress from the 4th to the first heaven, followed by the descent to earth. The ascent to our heaven and the descent to 3 makes up the number 7. When they alighted, it was on a beautiful day, when the earth was covered with luxuriant vegetation. From that time, the paths of the Osages separated. Some marched to the right, bearing the war gents, while those on the left were peace gents, including the Tasichu, whose chart this is. Then the Tasichu met the black bear, called in the tradition Kaksewahu-san, crow bone white, in the distance. He offered to become their messenger, so they sent him to the different stars for aid. According to the chart, he went to them in the following order: morning star, sun, moon, 7 stars, evening star, little star. Then the black bear went to the Wasinka Kutse, a female red bird sitting on her nest. This grandmother granted his request. She gave them human bodies, making them out of her own body. The Earth Lodge at the end of the chart denotes the village of Hamka Utakan Si, who were a very warlike people. Buffalo skulls were on the tops of the lodges, and the bones of the animals on which they subsisted whitened on the ground. The very air was rendered offensive by the decaying bodies and offal. The whole of the chart was used mnemonically. Parts of it, such as the four heavens and the four ladders, were tattooed on the throat and chest of the men belonging to the order. Another Siouan tribe, the Sia Indians of New Mexico, believed that in each of the 6 regions of the world, they named these as the 4 quarters, Zenith and Nadir, there was a giant mountain bearing a giant tree, at whose foot was a spring, in which dwelt one of the cloud rulers, each attended by one of the 6 primal priestesses of the Sia, who interceded constantly with the 6 cloud rulers to send rain to the Sia. The 6 varieties of their world trees were the spruce, the pine, the aspen, the cedar, and 2 varieties of the oak. It would be a brave, not to say a reckless scientist, who would say today how young or how old the Mayan civilization is. 30 years ago, answers would have come easily enough, but that was before the excavations of the great buried cities in Central America began, which may very well result in the uncovering of records which antedate the oldest we have. Already we know that America, youngest of the continents historically, is older prehistorically than we yet dare to say. And although we never knew more than a little about the Mayas and their beliefs, we know today how fragmentary and isolated those bits of knowledge are, and how untrustworthy the conclusions we have drawn from them. Nevertheless, under the date of 1640, there has come down to us a picture of the Mayan universe, copied by Father Caguludo from the central design of the Shalam Balam, or Sacred Book of Mani, and inserted in his Historia de Yucatan, written at the end of 21 years spent among the Mayans. At the bottom of the universe lies a cube which has long been recognized as representing, in the Mayan cosmogony, the Earth. Above the Earth cube, resting on 4 legs which rest in turn on the 4 quarters of the Earth, is the heavenly vase, Kum, which holds the celestial waters, the treasures of the snow and of the hail, of the rains and the showers, on which all life, vegetable, animal, and human depends. Above this vase hang the rain clouds, and within it grows the Yaxche, the green tree or the tree of life, its upper branches bearing on their tips the flowers or fruits of life on earth. Ol or Yol, that is to say, the soul or immortal principle of man. Under the green tree, Yaxche, the souls who have passed through Mitna, or the underworld, dwell in happiness, while the others sink into a region where they suffer eternal cold and hunger. In Brinton's Primer of Mayan Hieroglyphics, the inner figure of the cube, the vase, the clouds, and the tree is reproduced, lettered according to readings from the other of the sacred books. The earth cube in that picture is not lettered IUM, earth, but Tem, the altar. The earth signifies the great altar of the gods, and the offering upon it is life. The 13 heads surrounding the world tree signify, according to Brinton, the 13 Ahau Katuna, or greater cycles of years. They also may signify the 13 possible directions of space. That is, the complete terrestrial globe is symbolized by the 4 cardinal points, Zenith and Nadir, with man in the center making the 7th, and the complete celestial sphere is symbolized by adding the 6 directions, with man, the focal point, remaining the same. The border, therefore, says Brinton, expresses the totality of time and space, and the design itself symbolizes life within time and space. Another Mayan world picture is shown in figure 50 at left, which is the central design of the tableau of the Bakabs, instead of the 13 Ahau Katuna, or greater cycles of years. This design is surrounded by the signs of the 20 days, which extend in the original design beyond the figure here given, to the 4 cardinal points and to the gods and time cycles connected with them. Again, says Brinton, it is life within time and space. Here, sitting beneath the shade of the green tree at its roots, are the divine first pair, Kukulkan, the feathered or winged serpent god, and Zumukain, his spouse, the creator and the former, says the Popol Vuh, grandfather and grandmother of the race. Twofold grandmother, twofold grandfather, the maker, the former, the ruler, the serpent clothed in feathers, they who beget, they who impart life, They who rest upon the waters like a glowing light. They are clothed in color green and blue. Therefore their name is Gukumans, feathered serpent. The resemblances between the divisions of this Mayan tree and the Norse tree Yggdrasil are obvious, but here is a correspondence in ideas that is very curious. Between the 9 Norse worlds, it will be recalled, from the roots of the tree to its topmost branch ran Ratatosk, scamperer between men and gods, matter and spirit, space and time, a great energizer under the guise of a tiny squirrel. It is rather interesting to discover that under the green cosmic tree, Yaxche of Yucatan, sits a figure whose name, Kukulkan, is derived from a Mayan verb, kukul, meaning to revolve, to move round and round, as they move the great calendar wheels to accomplish the rotation of time, and that this rotation itself is called kukeb, the squirrel, derived directly from the same verb, kukul, to revolve, to move round and round. One more Mayan tree of life, too beautiful not to be included in any group of cosmic trees, particularly as it shows the mystery of metamorphosis almost in the act of transmutation from one form to another, is given in figure 51 at right. In the original drawing, the god of the North Star rests upon it as it rises from the heavenly vase that holds the heavenly waters. And, to show that Egypt and Yucatan were not separated in fancy, at least by oceans, Atlantic or Pacific, here is a little drawing at left of the sacred tree of the Egyptians, with heaven, or the sky goddess Nut, bestowing knowledge on man and his soul. The whole world, says an old Hebrew writing, is like a gigantic tree full of branches and leaves, the root of which is the spiritual world of the Sephiroth, or it is like a firmly united chain, the last link of which is attached to the upper world, or like an immense sea, which is constantly filled by a spring, everlastingly gushing forth in its streams. When we take up the Kabbalah to interpret anything in it, we touch a book on which literally thousands of interpretive books have been written. The Arbor Sephirothica is perhaps its keystone figure, and the interpretations of the relation and meaning of the 10 Sephiroth which compose the tree differ so that any summary of them is not only hopeless, but useless here. It is possible, however, to sketch largely, and with no detail, a general explanation of this Hebrew world tree. First of all, what are the 10 Sephiroth? First of all, then, they are indicated by the first 10 letters of the primitive alphabet in which, as we have noted before, gods were letters, letters were ideas, ideas were numbers, and numbers were perfect signs. They may mean either to count, that is, they may mean numbers, or brilliance, or spheres, or they may mean qualities, standing for the several grades or stages of wisdom, or they may mean emanations. The Arbor Sephirothica shows the Hebrew scheme of creation, the esoteric side of the Genesis story, beginning with the assumption that creation began, not from the act of God, but from the emanation of God, due to his voluntary self-withdrawal in order that the universe might be created. When the holy aged, the concealed of all concealed, says the Zohar, assumed a form, he produced everything in the form of male and female. For wisdom expanded, and intelligence, the third Sephirah, proceeded from it, and thus were obtained male and female, such as wisdom, the father, and intelligence, the mother, from whose union other pairs of Sephiroth successively emanated. The first triad, then, which is represented, is Hokmah, or wisdom, Bina, or intelligence, and Sheter, the crown, or the equilibrizing force. These three in one are the balance of forces, otherwise the reason of the universe. This reason is not represented separately. It is held to be inherent in the relation existing between and in the first group of three. Then, from this first group of three forces, or its result, reason, came the second group of three, Chesed, or mercy, the father, Gebura, or justice, the mother, which together produce Tiferets, or beauty. This sixth, again, represents balance or equilibrium in forms about to be materialized, the mediator between the crown, or creator, and the kingdom, or creation. The third triad consists of Netzeth, or victory, the father, explained sometimes as the eternal triumph of intelligence and justice, the two mothers, Od, or glory, the mother, from which two springs, Lasad, the foundation, the absolute. The three triads, three forms each of the intellectual, the spiritual, and the material qualities, combine to form the 10th Sephirah, Malkuth, or the kingdom, or sovereignty over the kingdom or universe, manifested in the 10 branching leaves. These branching leaves manifest in turn the direct relation existing between the 10 Sephiroth and Adam Kadmon, the primordial, heavenly, incorruptible man created in this way only in the image of God. Adam Kadmon is the branching fruit of the tree of knowledge and holds the middle place between the Ein Sof, or all in all, and the 10 emanations. Holds, that is, the point of balance or equilibrium. In this sense, Adam Kadmon here, as in Plate 4, is regarded as the supporter and upholder of the universe. Nothing could be, at first sight, more unlike than these two images of the three worlds, but there are enormous likenesses between them. Another way of expressing this interrelation between the 10 emanations is that the first Sephirah, by virtue of its equilibrizing power, unites the second and third, wisdom and intelligence. That the sixth Sephirah, beauty, by the same virtue, unites the fourth and fifth, mercy and justice. That the ninth Sephirah, foundation or absolute, unites the seventh and eighth, victory and glory, and by union with all, sends forth the 10th Sephirah, the kingdom or the universe. Again, the first three Sephiroth form the world of reason, the second three the world of spirit, the last four the world of the body. A tree must have a soil in which to grow. Soul and spirit must have a body. Moving energy must take a form, and a very beautiful and subtle interpretation of the world tree myth may be found in an old black-figured kylix by Exekias, dating from the 6th century BC. It is called Dionysus in the Ship, and its reading depends entirely on an understanding of what the story of Dionysus meant to the Greeks and all the peoples who came under their influence. The story of Dionysus is always the story of Dionysus and Apollo. There is not such a thing as even half of this story. One without the other does not exist. It veiled one of the greatest of the Greek mysteries, this conflict between these two gods and the final reconciling of their struggle. It symbolized the conflict between light and darkness, between spirit and form, quite literally the conflict between spirit and body. It was a mythological drama based on the old cry of man, "I feel two natures struggling within me." The first impulse of antagonism is to defeat, even to destroy. It seldom occurs to two opponents that there is a middle point, an equilibrium or balance where peace abides. The story of Dionysus Apollo is not one of destruction, but of final reconcilement between two opposing forces. Neither was to be rightly judged on the basis of good or of evil, but on the basis of incompleteness only. Each needed the complementary force of the other. Without the other, neither was whole. It was not Dionysus alone, nor Apollo alone, but the two reconciled and united that solved the struggle. In this kylix, Dionysus Apollo floats on the ethereal ocean. The body or boat, a great fish, carries the unified God. The two are one, and from them united spring two great vines laden with fruit and leaves. About the living boat, 7 dolphins, spies of the sea, keep guard to forecast storms and to warn the pilot. In this Dionysian vine picture, the myth cycle of the world tree rounds upon itself. The tree, given by the gods to mortal man, is itself reborn through man, reconciled and made immortal, and is given back to heaven as a celestial vine. Dionysus Apollo had escaped the wheel of fate, and could forever mediate between the remnants of man still bound to it and the Olympian gods. The mystery of the relation between darkness and light, which is the mystery of Dionysus Apollo, had another representation in the 17th century, when Robert Fludd based the whole scheme of creation upon it. It will be interesting to compare this drawing with some Chinese conceptions of the primal causal cosmic struggle between light and darkness. At the top of the figure, says Fludd, is expressed the head, or the root of all things, both in the simplicity of his unity and the duality of his universal attributes, namely, one God, one supreme being, one essence or divine mind. whether willing or non-willing. In the negative aspect, it withdraws within itself and refrains from sending itself forth from itself. B is the effect of the divine potency or non-willing, in which state all things were formless and in potency only, before the beginning of the world. B, in other words, is a hieroglyphic image of God, thus far altogether non-willing, in which stage God is in his true essence, shining within himself, but not sending himself forth from himself. Such was the primal chaos, from the bowels of which the materials of the universe were originally drawn forth. Just as B was the hieroglyph of the latent God, so C is the representation of his glorious emanation for the creation of the world. This emanation is the Word of God. From the union of these two comes one world, D and E, in the image of one who participates in it, both in his positive and negative aspects. That is to say, from the two opposites, the world is born in the image of its creator. The world is in God, which means that the world is partly created and partly uncreated. Created if we consider the material world, but uncreated if we consider its maker. According to the mystical theology of Orpheus, Hesiod, Euripides, and Aeschylus, who involve the divine mysteries in allegory, the sun is taken in archetype as that divine source from which all ornament and beauty, embracing a multiple harmony of life, is derived. In his right hand is pity and benevolence, in his left, severity and punishment. One aspect of this divine mystery of the sun visible and the sun invisible, they concealed, he says, under the name of Apollo, god of day and of light, the other under the name of Dionysus, god of night and of darkness. Each was but half of the other, only the two are one. Yet each one, though separate, had within him the seeds of darkness and light. Hence they argued that God is both destruction and creation, corruption and generation, author and actor, that just as he composes by the number 7, so he destroys by the number 7. For the sacred number 7 is attributed to the god of light. Night, in its darkness, or Dionysus, symbolized God in his negative aspect of withdrawal within himself, and day, in its light, or Apollo, symbolized God in his positive aspect of giving forth by emanation from himself. The famous rose tree of the Rosicrucians had a Dionysian connection, for the rose as well as the vine was sacred to this god. It has also a Peruvian connection, the Peruvian Eve. There is a native drawing of her later on, sinned not by eating the apple, but by picking roses, which were the Peruvian tradition, the fruit of the tree. The bee is almost as much a part of this drawing as the rose tree. Here are a few odd myths of this marvelous being. According to Porphyrius, the moon was called a bee. According to Virgil, the bee alone of all animate things descended from paradise is a part of the mind of God, never perishes, and alone of all animate things ascends alive into heaven. Dionysus is sometimes identified with the moon, and is said in some traditions to have been born again as a bee. Again, the wax of bees produces light. Hence bees are those that feed on fire. As for the rose, its bud resembles the acuminated or pointed sphere that symbolizes ether in the ancient stupa, and the open rose to the Rosicrucians symbolized the universe spread out like a book, which he who could might read. This representation of the universe by a rose appears to be a later development of a very ancient figuration of the universe by an onion, also a plant sacred to the old gods. Rather, the universe was represented by the layers of the onion. The Egyptians and the Hebrews and the Tibetans have used this over and over again. The core, to which the layers cling, may be the axis of the world, or the polar mountain of the world. In the Tibetan universe, the onion's core is Mount Meru, surrounded by 15 opaque, semi-transparent layers of oceans and mountains again, until the outer skin is reached, which is the wall of iron about the universe. And all the heavens are one above the other, like the layers of an onion, says the Kabbalah. And our companions who live in the south have seen in the first book, and in the book of Adam, that all these earths which are below are like the firmaments above, that upon that, and this upon this, and between each earth, a heaven, or firmament, is spread out between each other, like the fine skin of the layers on the onion. "13. Mountains of the world. In many of these world tree pictures, we have seen world mountains as well, but northern ones mostly. Yet the concept of the antipodal polar mountains of Earth is very old. They stand opposed to each other in the Babylonian universe. They are inherent in the very idea of an underworld to this overworld, whether the idea is carried to its logical conclusion or not. As above, so below. If the world mountain of the north was the abode of the gods, the abode of demons was the world mountain of the south. Figure 53 at right illustrates not only the antipodal mountains of a spherical earth, but also the four quarters of the earth, the abode of gods, of living men, of dead men, and of demons, beginning with the northern mountain and descending to the south. It may be it is only because the popular concept of the figure of Earth swung more or less uniformly to that of a sphere after the Western world was discovered and all the continents of the Earth were mapped out, that we are apt to think the spherical concept is a modern one. As a matter of historical fact, the Greeks established it in the minds of philosophers by at least 500 BC, and it is certain that the idea did not originate with them. Its origin, like the origin of most of these concepts, is trackless, if for no other reason than the concept of Earth as the mundane egg, a spheroid form, goes back into untraceable antiquity. More and more it seems that, in order to explain any of these recurrences, we must take almost literally Fechner's conception of a great reservoir in which lie pooled the memories of all of Earth's vanished inhabitants, which now and then opens to let a little spill out into the minds of a few living men. For more and more it begins to appear, as if always, somewhere on Earth, all of these figures of Earth have existed in the minds of some of its people. Perhaps it may mean that the Earth has been all of these things at different stages of its development, that it is constantly changing, never the same, that its changes are its life, and that, far from being a disintegrating, dying planet, it is a continuously evolving one, always undergoing the mysterious process of creation. But this is only a guess. Certainly, thanks to the symmetrical speculations of the Pythagorean and Platonian Greeks, the theory of the antipodal region and the antipodal race of beings was so much a part of the science of the day that it seemed necessary to St. Augustine, 1,000 years later, 5th century AD, to establish some sort of a theory of the figure of the Earth, which, although retaining its supposed spherical form, should nevertheless cast the theory of the antipodes into everlasting disrepute. The theory of two centers, as illustrated at left, or the theory that the Earth was composed of two spheres, one of land and one of water, contained one within the other, but not concentric, solved the problem exactly of retaining the sphere and rejecting the antipodes. The terrestrial globe rose a little from the watery sphere, and it was, of course, the northern part of the Earth which so rose. When it was objected to by some on the ground that only lighter elements rise to the surface of water, and the denser irresistibly sink, the two center theorists promptly replied that the terrestrial sphere rose only a little from the water, as an egg, plunged into a water-filled basin, would rise a little to the surface, and they asserted farther that these two spheres signified the true meaning of the separation of land and water. But Strabo, several hundred years before, facing the problem of the density of the elements, accounted for it much more simply. It was true, he said, that by nature the water was higher in situation than the earth, and in the beginning of things compassed it all about like a sphere. But since Providence designed to create animals and chiefly man, a creature not belonging to the water, God therefore raised the earth and caused it to dwell in diverse places, and in others he sunk it and made it hollow, that the waters might lie hid, and that dry land might appear over it, and thus afford a seat for man and other animals of the land. What made the early church combat the idea of a southern habitable hemisphere was not so much the difficulty of explaining how men could stand feet to feet, as the difficulty of explaining why races of men, all sons of Adam, should be utterly cut off and separated from each other by the impassable belt of fire that circled the earth. There seemed no reason or purpose in this that could be called divine. This was the heresy. But it was also true that the literal mechanics of an inhabited antipodal region without the convenient theory of gravitation to explain everything, was too much for a reasonable man to accept without an admirable struggle. What are they, said Lactantius, a 4th century father of the African Church, that think there are antipodes, such as walk with their feet against ours? Do they speak with any likelihood? Or is there any one so foolish as to believe that there are men whose heels are higher than their heads, that things which with us do lie on the ground do hang there, that the plants and trees grow downwards, that the hail and rain and snow fall upwards to the earth? And do we admire the hanging orchards among the 7 wonders, whereas here the philosophers have made the fields and seas, the cities and mountains hanging? What shall we think that men do cling to that place like worms, or hang by their claws as cats? Or if we suppose a man a little beyond the center to be digging with a spade, it is likely, as it must be according to this opinion, that the earth which he loosened should of itself ascend upwards, or else suppose 2 men with their middles about the center, the feet of one being placed where the head of the other is, and so 2 other men cross them. Yet all these men, thus situated, according to this opinion, should stand upright, and many other gross consequences would follow, which a false imagination is not able to fancy as possible. In the universe of the Lamas, we come upon the very greatest of the mountains of the world, Mount Meru, the universal hub, the support of all the worlds. Meru is also the garden of the tree of life, for the jambu or rose apple world tree springs from it. This Tibetan universe is not only a beautiful but a complex universe as well, and it is going to be difficult to describe its many divisions simply and directly. But first of all, say the Lamas of Tibet, this world of ours is merely one of a series, which altogether form a universe, or chiliocosm, of which again there are many. Each universe is set like a jewel in illimitable space, upon a warp or woof of blue air or wind. Crossed thunderbolts are the symbols of this blue air, which is hard and indestructible like a diamond. Upon this warp or woof is set the body of the waters, and upon this is a foundation of pure gold, on which is set the earth. From the earth's axis soars Mount Meru, crown of the world, which rises to a height of 84,000 miles before it is surrounded by the heavens. It is likened to the handle of a millstone, and halfway up its southern side is the jambu, or rose apple tree, the object of conflict between the gods and the Titans. From its root 4 inexhaustible rivers take their source. It bears an immortal fruit, like gold, which falls into the rivers, and from its scattered pips comes the golden seed which is carried down to the sea, and is, sometimes, washed up again on its shores. In the ocean about Mount Meru lie the 4 continents, each with 2 attending satellites of a tortoise, but the continents are separated from the sacred Meru by 7 stages, or golden mountains, between which flow 7 oceans of 7 substances, fragrant milk which is churned by the gods, curds, butter, blood or sugar cane juice, poisons or wine, fresh water, and salt water. Encircling all these divisions is a double iron wall which shuts off the light of the sun and the moon of each universe from all the space which intervenes between it and the succeeding universe. No ray of light illumines the void between the thousand universes. This is the outer darkness. The orbit of the sun, or glazed fire, and of the moon, or glazed water, is the summit of the innermost ring of mountains, called the yoke. Between these 2 heavenly bodies hang the jeweled umbrella of the kings and the banner of victory. These are shown in the figure. In their realm of air, on this same plane, live the 8 angelic mothers. The 4 continents are placed exactly in each of the 4 directions, and they are of 4 different shapes, corresponding to the 4 forms of the 4 elements. To the north lies the cube, or earth-shaped body. To the west, the sphere, or water-shaped body. To the south, the triangle, or fire-shaped body. And to the east, the crescent, or air-shaped body. Of the 4 continents, they say that all except Jambudvipa are fabulous, but they are described as follows. On the east is Videha, or vast body. This is shaped like the crescent moon, and is white in color. It is 9,000 miles in diameter, and the inhabitants are described as tranquil and mild, and of excellent conduct. and with faces of the same shape as this continent, i.e. crescentic, like the moon. On the south is Jambudvipa, or our own world, and its center is the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya. It is shaped like the shoulder blade of a sheep, is blue in color, and it is the smallest of all, being only 7,000 miles in diameter. Here abound riches and sin, as well as virtue. The inhabitants have faces of similar shape to that of their continent, i.e., somewhat triangular. On the west is Gadhanya, or wealth of oxen, which in shape is like the sun and red in color. It is 8,000 miles in diameter. Its inhabitants are extremely powerful, and, as the name literally means cow and ox and action, they are believed to be specially addicted to eating cattle, and their faces are round like the sun. On the north is Uttara Kuru, or Northern Kuru tribe, of square shape and green in color, and the largest of all the continents, being 10,000 miles in diameter. Its inhabitants are extremely fierce and noisy. They have square faces like horses, and live on trees, which supply all their wants. They become tree spirits on their death, and these trees afterwards emit bad sounds. The satellite continents resemble their parent continent in shape, and each is half its size. The left satellite of Jambudvip, namely the ox-tail whisk continent, is the fabulous continent of the Rakshas, to which Padmasambhava is believed to have gone and to be still reigning there, and each of the latter presents towards Mount Meru one of the following divine objects respectively, such as, on the east or south, the mountain of jewels named Amalika, shaped like an elephant's head, and on the south, the wish-granting tree, on the west, the wish-granting cow, and on the north, the self-sprung crops. As for Mount Meru, some say that these four gifts of the left satellites are situated on the sides of Meru itself, which has square sides of gold and of jewels. Its eastern face is crystal or silver, like the color of the eastern continent. The southern face is sapphire or lapis lazuli. The west side is of ruby, and the north side is gold. Mount Meru is always covered with fragrant flowers and herbs. It has 4 lower compartments under the heavens. The lowest is inhabited by the Yaksha genii, holding wooden plates. Above live the wreath holders. Above these dwell the eternally exalted ones, and above them the Titans, the race of beings who contend always with the gods for the jambu, or rose-apple tree. Originally gods, the Titans were, like Satan, thrown out of heaven, and their place in the Tibetan system is intermediate between heaven and earth. Above the Titans, at a distance of 168,000 miles, are the realms of the gods. In the lowest compartment are the 4 great guardian kings of the quarters, the white guardian of the east, the green guardian of the south, the red guardian of the west, and the yellow guardian of the north, who forever guard the heavens against attacks of outer demons. The 8 great classes of supernatural beings are subject of these kings, and these guardians of the 4 quarters are aided by the 10 Lokpals, who watch the 10 directions, that is, the 8 points of the compass, and above and below. A Kalmuk world picture is quite worth comparing with this universe of the Lamas, for the Kalmuks, now of Russia, primitively inhabited China. They arrived on the shores of the Caspian Sea about 1600, but they brought with them their own conception of the world, with its colors and shapes. This drawing shows Mount Sumeru in the center of the world, through whose center the world tree springs. Sometimes they will say that each of the 4 mountainsides bears a tree. Sumeru is shaped, they believe, like a truncated pyramid, and around it are 7 mountains and 7 seas, not represented in this drawing. The nearer a mountain ring is to the central mountain, the higher it is, they believe, and the higher the mountain rings, the farther they are from each other. The Kalmuks say also that the distance of each from the central mountain is the same as its height. The colors of the 4 sides of the truncated Sumeru are like those of the Tibetan Meru, and the Kalmuks also place 4 continents in the 4 quarters, each of a different shape, and each accompanied by 2 smaller islands of like shape, so that again the total number of islands surrounding the center of the world is the zodiacal 12. The Tibetan Jambudvip, the southern continent, which was shaped like the shoulder blade of a sheep, and whose inhabitants had faces shaped similarly, somewhat triangular, is slightly modified in the Kalmuk picture to an oval continent, inhabited by an oval or egg-faced race, but it is almost the same. An oval such as this is hardly more than an expanded or expanding triangle, and the egg-shaped islands and faces may be called with a fair accuracy somewhat triangular. No claim for particular beauty, and certainly no claim for any antiquity, is made for the Chinese hemisphere shown in figure 57 at left, drawn, says Dr. Dubose, by a monk in Suzhou who perceived that times were changing, that the new geography was of a spherical earth and not of a world mountain, but who realized that the North Pole is permanent, if anything is. He therefore drew a conventional modern hemisphere with its lines of latitude and longitude, over which he traced Europe, Asia, Africa, and then upon the top of the world raised his world mountain, peerless Su-Meru, spine and marrow of the 33 heavens, and situated in the very center of the world. Its shape is ordinarily that of an inverted cone, whose medial line is cut by the Earth's surface, whose base is above, and whose apex penetrates the Earth to a distance equaling the distance of its base from the Earth. Or, as the Chinese explain it, its depth in the sea is equal to its altitude in the air. In the undersea division are the countless hells. The unknown monk of Suzhou made his sacred mountain resemble a pagoda, more than a cone when he compromised with the new age, but a simple projection of the pagoda lines will result in a figure quite cone-like. The Wheel of Life. Closely associated with the world mountains are the many wheels of life, by which the ancients sought to picture the relations of parts of the universe to each other and to the whole. There is a hint of this in the Tibetan world picture, with Mount Meru, the axis or hub of the world, about which are placed, like spokes in a wheel, the 4 quarters of the earth, with their 3 islands each, making the sum of 12 radii from the center. The wheel of the zodiac was, of course, the great original for all such figures, particularly for the wheels of life. For uncounted centuries, man knew the geography of the heavens better than the geography of the earth, and whatever life on earth meant to him. The unfailing procession of the great star groups of the zodiac meant certainly law, order. There were zones written in the heavens long before man stretched his imaginary lines of the terrestrial zones over the earth. The circle called the zodiac, said Plutarch, is placed under the 3 that are in the midst, and lies obliquely, gently touching them all. And it is not hard to see how this great circle came to seem to man a mirror of the earth, a storehouse of its history, its constant watcher in the sky, and the unerring prophet of its future. The Greeks named this oblique ring of star groups just behind the sun when it sets, or just before it when it rises, the zodiac, or path of animals, because the names and configurations of the groups were mostly those of animals, and by that name we know it. But no one knows how long before the days of the Greeks, far earlier astronomers, first linked the single groups of stars into the 12 great signs of the star-bearing circle. Physica Sacra is an early 18th century Bible illustrated almost text for text, and plate 26 is the first illustration for the first verse of the first chapter of the first book. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Outside the zodiacal wheel are clouds upon clouds bearing a multitude of spheres, and, in addition, 7 numbered diagrams. Figure 1 in this plate illustrates the system of the 11 heavens, with the earth the center of the universe. Figure 2 is the Tychonian system. Figure 3, what is known as the semi-Tychonian system. Figure 4, the blazing and effulgent sun, containing within himself his 7 children, Earth and Moon, and the 5 great planets. Figure 5, a group of the heavenly bodies. Figure 6, an armillary sphere. Figure 7, an astrolabe, which is almost to say the handle of the stars, and which was called by the old astronomers the mathematical jewel. The northern and southern hemispheres of the heavens are merely supplementary to Schutzer's Creatio Universi. They are taken from an Arabic celestial globe made of brass in 1275 AD, which was deposited in the Museum of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland. Near the South Pole is an inscription of Kufic characters stating that it was made by the most humble and the supreme god, Mohammed ben Halah, the astronomer of Mosul, in the year of the Hegira, 674. The zodiac was known to the Arabs not as the path of animals, but as the girdle of the castles, and contained, with one or two variations in name, the same signs we have today: Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, this the Arabs called the ear, Balance or Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricornus, Aquarius, and Pisces. They are together, including the signs of the zodiac, 47 constellations on these Arabic celestial hemispheres. The ones inscribed on the northern hemisphere are Little Bear, Greater Bear, the Dragon, Cepheus, Botes, the Northern Crown, the Kneeling Hercules, the Lyre, the Hen, or Swan, the Lady in her chair, or Cassiopeia, the bearer of Medusa's head, an example, Perseus, the Charioteer, the Charmer of Serpents, or Serpentarius, the Arrow, or Sagittarius, the Flying Eagle, or Aquila, the Dolphin, part of the horse's head, the Greater Horse, Pegasus, the Chain, or Andromeda, the Triangle. The constellations inscribed on the southern hemisphere are Ketos, the Whale, the Giant, or Orion, the River, or Acarnar, the Hare, or Lepus, the Greater Dog, or Canis, the Dog, or Procyon, the Ship, or Argo, the Hydra, the Flagon, or Crater, the Crow, or Corvus, the Centaur, or Centaurus, the Beast, or Phara, the Censer, the Southern Crown, the Southern Fish. Of the two wheels of life, or fate, or law, to be given here, we begin with the one that seems the simpler. The Chinese wheel is almost a zodiac or path of animals of itself. The Chinese zodiac, or yellow path of the sun, differed materially in its signs from the Greek Arabic one just given. It contained 12 animals: the mouse, the cow, the tiger, the rabbit, the dragon, the serpent, the horse, the ram, the ape, the hen, the dog, and the pig. 6 of the 12 divisions are separating paths or currents through or over which the traveler passes to the next stage. 4 of the remaining divisions are the abodes of beasts, of insects, of fish, and of birds. The other 2, separated from each other by one of the spiral-like rivers, are inhabited by poor men and rich men, or by mandarins and tillers of the soil. The second of these wheels is the one elaborately developed in the Tibetan Wheel of Life, to which is an almost necessary key. It is a Tibetan version of an Indian painting in one of the abandoned cave temples of Ajanta, which L. Austin Waddell holds to be a complete authentic account of human life from the absolute standpoint of the earliest Buddhist philosophy. The Lamas of Tibet say that Buddha himself originated the Wheel of Life, forming it on the earth with grains of rice from a rice field schoolroom. According to the old story, while tarrying for a while at the squirrel's feeding ground in the Venuvana forest near Rajagriha, Buddha instructed his disciple Ananda to make a wheel, for the sake of illustrating what another disciple had seen when he visited other spheres. This wheel was to have 5 spokes, between which were to be shown the several hells, animals, ghosts, gods, and men. In the middle, a dove, a serpent, and a hog were to symbolize lust, hatred, and ignorance. Around the outer rim was to wind the 12-fold circle of causation, in regular and inverse order. Beings were to be shown as being born in a supernatural way, as by the machinery of a water wheel falling from one state and being produced in another. Buddha himself, as an enlightened one, liberated from the fate of recurrence on the wheel, was to be outside of it, one who had escaped. This diagram, made first of rice grains, was later filled in, 2nd century AD, with pictures by the Indian monk Nagarjuna, but these pictures are said to be not his own inventions, but the visual images of Buddha's own parables and allegories. The key to the Tibetan Wheel of Life will be found and aid in following the interpretation of it, which is Waddell's, and is given here much abridged. The disc, symbolizing the endless cycle of life, is held in the grasp of a monster who represents the horrors of attachment, the wretchedness of clinging to life. The broad tire of the wheel is filled with the 12-linked closed chain called the causal nexus, or the 12-fold circle of causation. In example, the causes of life and of misery. At the center or nave lie the three vices or delusions, the daughters of desire, symbolizing lust, ill will, and stupidity, which lie at the core of rebirth and are here given in the forms of a dove, a serpent, and a pig, colored respectively red, green, and black. The body of the wheel, filled with various pictures, is supposed to be constantly revolving, thereby producing the whirling on the wheel of life. The way of escape is indicated by the 12 links, and the first link is the connecting link between the old life and the new. It might be denominated unconscious will to escape. The links in the causal chain are 1. A blind she-camel, ignorant, unconscious will, led by a driver, karma. In this picture, however, the first link is represented by a blind old woman led by a man, with its meaning the same. 2. A potter modeling clay on his wheel, confirmations and impressions of, and on formless clay. 3. A monkey, the beginning of consciousness. The new man is approaching to the human, but is still an unreasoning automaton. 4. A man being ferried across an ocean. Self-consciousness, the individual crossing the ocean of life. 5. An empty house. Understanding achieved through the empty house of the senses. 6. A kiss, or contact with the outside world. 7. An arrow entering a man's eye, feeling or perception. 8. A man drinking wine, desire or thirst. 9. A man gathering fruit and storing it in baskets, greed or the satisfying of desire. 10. A married woman, wife of him whose life is here traced, fuller life, being, becoming, even rebirth and the continuance of being for another existence. 11. Parent and child, birth of an heir. 12. A corpse being carried off to burial, decay and death, which leads to 1. Unconscious will for rebirth, and the cycle of the wheel is begun again. The ways of life or rebirth are, from highest to lowest: 1. Gods, the Sura. 2. Titans, the Asura. 3. Man, Nara, or me. 4. Beasts, the Dudo, or best goers. 5. Tantalized ghosts, Pretas. 6. Hell, Naraka, or Nal-Ka'am. To live in the first 3 worlds is superior. To live in the last 3 is inferior. The highest world being heaven, and the lowest hell. In heaven, above the Titans, on the ethereal summit of Mount Meru, dwell the gods. In the lowest regions of the heavens dwell the guardian kings of the 4 quarters: Dhritarashtra, the white guardian of the east; Virudaka, the green guardian of the south; Virupaksha, the red guardian of the west; Vaisravana, the yellow guardian of the north. In the upper right-hand section of the Wheel of Life, the Titans, the Asura, or not gods, have their abode. Since their chief characteristic is pride, this is the world of rebirth for the proud. The Titans correspond to Satan and his hosts, having been, like Satan and for the like cause, cast out from heaven. Living at the foot of Mount Meru, they hover forever between heaven and earth. The life of the Titans is much longer than the life of man, but it is the fate of every Titan to die, warring against the gods for the fruits of the heavenly Parijata tree, whose branches are in heaven, but whose roots are in their country, the tree of the concentrated essence of Earth's products. The Jambu tree is, in reality, according to this reading, the climber which encircles the ethereal tree, and through it the quintessence of Jambu Vit, or the Jambu continent of Earth, is instilled into the Parijata tree. Man, Nara or me, lives in the upper left-hand region, constantly confronting the 8 miseries: birth, old age, sickness, death, ungratified wishes, and struggle for existence, misfortune and punishment for lawbreaking.
I know people
separation
at church.
from relatives,
I've been here
and
for
cherished
fucking 20 years, dude.
offensive objects, and sensations. Of all these and other phases of ordinary existence, pictures abound.
So we just
within the
find
real.
one there. Yeah, I know that.
In a cottage,
You?
children at play, village scenes, people drinking wine under a tree, a flute player, women spinning and weaving, a borrower, two traders, a drunken man, workers tilling a field or gathering fuel in a forest or bent under heavy loads, the accidents of life, a man and a horse falling into a river, crime, two men fighting, another on trial, another suffering punishment, government, a king and his ministers, old age, disease, a doctor feeling a sick man's pulse, death, a corpse in a funeral ceremony,
everything this morning.
religion, a temple placed above all the other objects within the wheel, that is, Indra's palace. Beasts, lower right-hand quarter, are more miserable than man.
I was at the back of the worst.